Zero to Something, a novel inspired by true events. Written and narrated by Steve Urban. 2025, Steve Urban. All rights reserved. No part of this book may be reproduced in any form without prior written consent from the publisher, except for brief quotations in reviews or analysis. Dedication. For my grandchildren, Rose and Presley, and for every grandchild yet to come. You're the reason I kept going, the proof that storms can pass and something stronger can grow in their place. My hope for you is simple. Live with grit, love without fear, and leave a legacy worth handing down. Build a life that tells the truth about who you are and where you come from. Zero is never the end. It is only the beginning of your story. Count forward, always. Note to the reader: this story is my voice, my heart, and my lived experience. I worked closely with AI writing assistants for more than 6 months, sharing ideas, memories, and storylines to help shape it into what you're holding now. The AI tools help me organize thoughts, explore phrasing, and polish the language, but every emotion, every scene, and every truth came from me. I also had the steady guidance of my wife, Kim Urban, who read, questioned, and encouraged me through each draft, and my friend and ghostwriter, Sue Publicover, who helped with line editing and structure to prepare it for publication. This book took a team to finish, but the grit, the lessons, and the voice you hear are mine. Prologue. The empty house. The porch light was dead. The front door stuck like it didn't recognize me anymore, then gave way with a hollow sigh, and the night came in with me. My boots found the edge of the rug, and then there wasn't a rug, just dust patterns where furniture used to be. The living room was a negative, silhouettes of what had been, the couch shaded on the wall, the sun-faded rectangle where the wedding photo used to hang. In the kitchen, a cup of milk had curdled into a rind. The smell turned the room mean. The silverware drawer slid open easily. Nothing. Closet rods waved their empty hangers like pale ribs. The boys' room kept their absence neat. No stickers on the dresser, no scatter of tiny Legos waiting for bare feet. Just air. I stood in the doorway until the dark got heavy, then spoke her name once into it and heard it go nowhere. I checked the bathroom, the garage, beneath the sink, like maybe my life was hiding where the bleach lived. Then I unlocked the back gate and walked out under a hard, indifferent moon to the place by the shed where I'd thrown the old mattress months ago. It was swollen with rain, dog hair, and August. I dragged the mattress across the yard, my spine knocking under the weight, and shoved it through the doorway. It flopped in the middle of the room like something shipwrecked. I lay down on it in my wet jeans and listened to the house breathe without us. That's how the rest begins. I did inventory. Plates gone, clothes gone, photos gone, boys gone. I thought about knocking on a neighbor's door and asking if they'd seen a woman carry out a life. I briefly considered calling a friend, but shame is a quiet jailer. I dropped onto the mattress and learned a new kind of tiredness. The next morning, I still had a pulse and a job I could put my hands to. I called Ray, the closest thing I had to a father, and tried to explain what had happened, but my throat turned it to gravel. He was quiet for a moment before saying, "Don't mess that job up." Dial tone. It landed cold and true. There are sentences that hug you and sentences that hold you up by the collar. Sometimes you don't get to choose. I put the phone down and decided I would not miss my shift. At the store, the boss didn't ask for the story. We were closing a location that week. The break room was a heap of rejects. Microwave, dented mini fridge, a table with one leg that kept giving up. He rented a U-Haul on his own dime, drove it to my trailer that night, and helped me unload the wobbly kindness into a kitchen that had never been a kitchen. He left without saying much. Some men preach, some men show up with a dolly. I learned to trust the second kind. I started stacking my days like sandbags, open a store, drive 2 hours, close another, smile hard enough to crack something in the face, log miles like penance, hotel ice buckets, highway radio, receipts that said I was still technically alive, district maps spread across the passenger seat like an alibi. I was a district man, responsible for numbers, people, lights turning on when they were supposed to. And I would be that man even if no one met me at the door anymore. Work wasn't identity then. It was a rope. I gripped it. Nights were the worst, so I made them short. I kept a bottle in the cabinet for the hour my brain wouldn't unhook. Took 1 or 2 shots to blunt the edges, never enough to drown what still needed doing in the morning. I cussed the ceiling. I learned the lay of a room by its silence. I learned how to breathe when breathing hurt. Weeks later, a thought grew loud enough to hear 0 to something. It wasn't a plan, more like a dare. The number told the truth I didn't want to admit. I had less than nothing. The something wasn't a mansion, a title, a fix. It was a fork in a parking lot where a man decides to walk back toward his life instead of away from it. Years from that night, I would find a different kind of breathing up in the high country where phone bars go to die and the sky reminds you you're small and safe. But even here, on the floor of a house that had spit me out, I could smell pine that wasn't in the room and hear water that wasn't running. I promised myself that when the ground stopped moving, I'd go where the open air didn't lie. I'd go where the quiet could help. The boys would come back to me on the schedule a judge signed off on, by paper, by parking lot, by the kind of stubborn love that rattled every coin in my pocket. I didn't know that yet. What I knew was this. In the morning, I'd shave in a mirror that still belonged to the wall, wear a shirt that remembered being ironed, and walk into a store with my name stitched where customers could see it. The rest could think what it wanted. I would not mess the job up. And I would keep one promise to myself: we would not live at 0 forever. Part 1, Roots and Ruptures. Chapter 1, Red Creek. Red Creek, late summer. Before the empty house, before the phone call that knocked a piece of my name loose, there was the red house out past town where the gravel road turned to powder in summer and to pudding after a storm. If you drove by too fast, you'd miss it. Paint sunburned into a kinder shade, porch leaning the way. An old man leans when he laughs. Behind it, fields that weren't ours but felt like they might be if you kept your boots respectful. Mom worked at the bank and brought home the kind of tiredness that makes a woman quiet. We stretched hamburger helper like a prayer, more noodles, extra water, and the quiet belief it would be enough. Ray was there most days, hat on, hands with the permanent dark of honest work. I didn't know what a blood father was then. I knew who fixed the fence and whose boots were by the door. We were not rich, but the yard was an empire, a rusted three-wheeler, a BB gun with a sight that favored the left, Folgers cans lined on the fence like a carnival that charged in chores. Evenings tasted like dust and Dr. Pepper. The sky taught me how to want, not things, space. I chased rabbits I never caught and learned the sound of grass when it forgives you for falling in it. We'd ride the battered ATV down the 2-rut to the creek that went thin in August, throw rocks at nothing, and feel like soldiers who had survived a war called 4th grade. Some kids grow up with locked gates and trimmed hedges that keep the world tidy. I grew up where the horizon never learned your name and liked you anyway. We lost the red house the way you lose teeth, slow, then suddenly. I remember the last morning, the taste of boxes, the silence of a room that had already left without us. We moved into an apartment with thin walls where couples learned you were part of their fights, whether you wanted to be or not. I kept the outside in my pocket, walked farther, stayed out longer, took any job that paid in gas money. KFC grease became a cologne I couldn't wash off. The convenience store let me count the drawer, straighten the candy as if order could be a kind of hope. I told myself I was saving, but mostly I was buying distance. At 15, the world seems like it's made of doors you're not old enough to open. I opened them anyway. Work wasn't noble, it was necessary. A man learns early what kind of tired he prefers, muscle tired or soul tired. I picked muscle. After school, I stocked, mopped, counted, and learned two kinds of customers: the ones who saw you and the ones who used you like a vending machine. The second kind taught me to keep my voice even. The first kind taught me I wanted to be that kind someday. Sundays were for the sound of Ray's truck and the way the screen door recognized him. He didn't talk much, and I learned to read the weather on his shoulders. He wasn't my father. Those were words I'd hear later in a different apartment from a different mouth. But it was his coffee that steamed on our table and his chuckle that made the kitchen warm. If love is a language, his presence was. He spoke it without verbs. In school, I was average in the way a boy gets average by being good at leaving. I learned to measure rooms, who had power, who had rage, who was bored enough to make sport of you. I learned to go unnoticed until it was time to be useful. Teachers wrote quiet on report cards like it was a problem to be solved. Quiet kept me alive. Quiet held all the words I didn't yet trust the world with. That summer, we found an old trail that ran along the back fence line, a cut through the scrub only deer and bad ideas used. I rode it until the three-wheeler complained and then pushed it home using my back like a second engine. At the top of the last rise, I'd kill it and listen to the cows talk about nothing and feel, for half a minute, full. It wasn't a church, but I think something was listening. Money got thin enough to see light through. Mom smiled like a woman who could sew a parachute out of a pillowcase and make you believe it would hold. We learned the trick of paying just enough to keep the lights from going dark. When the fridge sounded lonely, Ray would show up with a sack of groceries and no speeches. I memorized that move. Years later, I would make it without thinking, dropping off bags, never asking if it was needed because asking makes pride wake up and ruin the moment. I don't remember the last night in Red Creek the way movies remember last nights, with toasts and promises. I remember a nail that had worked itself proud on the back step and caught me in the heel. I remember the porch light working that night and moths making bad choices. I remember looking out at the part of the yard where our voices had worn the grass thin and thinking the grass would heal and forget us. That's the mercy of places. They forgive you for leaving. Years from now, when the boys are taller than their trouble and I'm teaching myself how to be a softer man than the one the world trained, we'll come west for good. We'll find a place near a ridge where the sky keeps its promises and you can sleep with the windows open because the night knows your name. But in the beginning, there was Red Creek and a kid with dust on his shins and the world at the end of a dirt road waiting like a dare. Chapter 2, Last to Know. Oak Bend, Tuesday late afternoon. It was a Tuesday with the kind of tiredness that sticks to your shirt. Mom sat at my kitchen table across from a coffee that had gone the color of old pennies. She didn't clear her throat or ease in. She said it the way a nurse says a number you can't argue with. Ray isn't your biological father. The words didn't feel like words. They felt like the floor shifting a fraction of an inch and never shifting back. I waited for a laugh she didn't have. Then the room got loud with refrigerator hum and the tick of a cheap clock, and I stood up because sitting felt like drowning while pretending to be polite. I took my keys off the hook and left. The truck door groaned like I owed it money. I turned on the engine and just sat there, hands at 10 and 2, forehead to the wheel, letting the truth hit me in little waves. Then I did the worst smart thing. I called Ray. "You're not my dad," I said, already crying, already regretting that I'd said it like a weapon. Silence on the line, then that voice I knew better than my own. Steady, grainy, unexcited by drama. "We agreed your mother would tell you," he said. "She told you." A pause, a breath. "Are you still coming by Saturday?" "I've got a fence leaning." That was the entire sermon, not an apology, not a speech, not a denial, a fence leaning. The world was breaking open, and he was talking about posts and line levels. I wanted him to say he loved me, to beg me to call him Dad anyway. He didn't. He was the same as before the sentence, and God help me, that was almost worse. I hung up and hit the steering wheel with my palm until something in my hand hurt and something in my chest didn't. By dinner, I'd collected intel like a rookie detective, cousins who had known, an aunt who'd known, a half-brother who'd known. The betrayal wasn't the secret. It was every Sunday and Christmas where a room full of people chose silence over me. I was the last to know in a life I'd been told was mine. Weeks later, I spat into a tube at the kitchen counter like it might spit back a map. When the results came, I stared at the name of a man who had my mouth and not my last name, a city I'd never lived in, dates that did arithmetic my heart didn't like. Then another email, matter of fact as a weather update. He'd died last year. I closed the laptop and sat with that small, stupid grief, late by 12 months to a conversation that would never happen. The strangest part was what refused to change. Saturday came, I drove out. Ray had the posts stacked and the line stretched, hat low, hands nicked by wire. We sunk cedar into dirt and tamped it down with our boots. He didn't mention the call. He didn't mention biology. He didn't mention anything except the thing in front of us, which was a fence that needed standing. Presence is a language some men speak so fluently they forget its love. He wasn't my father. He was the man with the truck, the groceries in years when the fridge sounded empty, the laugh that warmed the kitchen. He was the one showing up. And on the list of things a son needs, the man who shows up outranks most. That night, I made a vow that marked me quiet and permanent. My kids would never have to buy the truth from a stranger. They wouldn't learn who they were from a database or a death notice. In my house, news would arrive on time. If the ground shook, they'd feel it with me. I didn't have much to offer then, some busted furniture and a work ethic people mistook for pride, but I could offer that. No more secrets, no more last to know, no more calling a man in tears because a kitchen table ran out of mercy. And somewhere under all that anger, something small and useful survived. The kid at the red house whose church was a field and a sky too wide to own. Even on nights like this, I'd drive a back road until the air got honest and the noise in my head quieted down enough to hear my own name. The outside has always been the place I remember who I am without anyone else's story on me. Chapter 3, All Night Shift, Oak Bend, after midnight. My first management style was a cocktail of caffeine and arrogance. 21, a set of keys I hadn't earned jangling like applause, and a 24-hour highway store that smelled like coffee and brake dust. I came in hot and right and loud. I had notes for everyone. I had a solution for problems that didn't exist. The night my team quit, they did it like a marching band, one uniform after another folded on the counter. By midnight, it was just me, a flickering fluorescent, and a long list of people who'd decided I wasn't worth their paycheck. Open sign stays on. That's the rule. So I ran the thing alone. The register beeped at me like a hospital machine. I bagged smokes, counted money in the drawer, mopped a floor that stayed sticky no matter how much you argued with it. At 2 a.m., a cattle hauler rolled in, and 6 men in hats bought enough coffee to stun a horse. 3 asked where the jerky was. 1 asked me if I was hiring. Yes, I said and meant it. You 18? He wasn't. Back to mopping. At 4, a woman with eyeliner like a fence line wanted to pay in change for $20 of gas. I counted nickels until my thumb turned gray, locked the door behind her, and plunged both hands into the mop bucket just to feel something cold. Somewhere after that, the chirp of the cooler became a metronome, and I stopped thinking in complete sentences. The sun showed up like a witness I hadn't invited. By 10 the second day, I was interviewing at the counter between lotto tickets and questions about the bathroom key. What makes you want to work here? I heard myself ask a kid with a mullet and a good handshake. He looked at my eyes, bloodshot and honest, and said, You look like you need help. I hired him. Then I left him to ring a line of farmers while I hauled myself into the restroom to wash my face and figure out what kind of leader I wanted to be now that the kind I was had walked out on me. 30 hours, give or take a few hallucinations, taught me more than any seminar I've slept through since. I learned you can't manage what you won't do yourself. I learned that being right doesn't help if your kind of right hits like a hammer. I learned that if you treat people like replaceable parts, they'll prove you right and leave. And I learned that when the last person's gone, you still have a name stitched on your chest and a key that fits the lock. The shift doesn't care how you feel. The shift wants a body. Leadership starts when you bring yours. That season doubled as school for other lessons with sharper edges. Months later, in a different store, I'd fire the police chief's daughter for dipping into deposits and get myself kindly shown the door by people upstairs who didn't want the headache. Right doesn't always win. Sometimes right gets you fired and sitting on the edge of your bed with a cardboard box calling the one person who won't flinch. And when you're that broke and that embarrassed, you pour a quiet 2 fingers of bourbon and promise to do better with the part you control. Your mouth, your temper, your follow-up. Trust, sure, but verify too. Cash and character both need counting. I didn't know it then, but those scar lessons would keep my companies alive years later when the stakes got tall. When I finally crashed that night, I didn't dream. I lay on my back in the corner of a room that smelled like lemon pledge and diesel and thought about the man I wanted to become. Not rich, not important, just the kind who keeps the lights on for other people, the kind who show up with a dolly and a U-Haul when you don't have forks, the kind who answers the phone and says one sentence so simple it lands like a commandment. Don't mess the job up. The kind of man Ray was, even when he wasn't what biology said a father should be. I wanted to be the reason a kid could sleep without checking the lock twice. I wanted to be the guy who stayed. That's all. That's plenty. Interlude, the weed run, Red Creek, high noon long ago. I was 18 and allergic to wisdom. Red Creek made boys out of hard chores and bad ideas, and I had a surplus of the second. I stocked shelves at a corner store that sold gas jerky and hope in scratch-off form. My manager, call him Ace, ran a side hustle that smelled like skunks and easy money. One afternoon, he leaned across the counter and asked if I wanted to earn $500 in one drive. Do I have to ask too many questions? Just one, Ace said. Can you keep your mouth shut? I could. I did. I shouldn't have. We loaded 20 pounds into the trunk of a '79 Ford Torino, the color of a bruise your mom doesn't see. The car felt like a dare before the key turned. I sat in the passenger, hands kneed in my lap like a church kid trying not to fidget. Ace drove with a confidence I later learned is a symptom. The air conditioner worked as hard as a lie. We pulled onto highway whatever and aimed at the state line like we'd been hired to test destiny's patience. Red Creek unfurled behind us, cotton fields, a silo that had never apologized, 3 mailboxes politely sharing a post, and the land got flatter until the sun started to look like an accusation. We didn't talk. We tuned a radio that didn't like authority. I watched the needle on the speedometer flirt with numbers I didn't want to be in the same room with. I kept seeing my mother's face the way it looks when she's washing dishes and pretending not to be worried by a quiet house. Outside Gideon County, a patrol car tucked itself into the scenery like a spider. Lights followed, blue and red, loud even in daylight. Ace cursed and eased over. Gravel performed its truth. The officer's legs unfolded from the cruiser like instructions to a test I hadn't studied for. "Afternoon," he said. "You know how fast you were going?" Ace went with charm. I tried to look like a future that could be salvaged. The cop took our licenses, wrote a ticket slow enough to make a point, and asked us both to step out. He ran his flashlight along the interior as if sunlight needed reinforcement, then looked at the trunk like it had volunteered for inspection. I stopped breathing in a way that made my heart consider other hobbies. He tapped the lid with his knuckle, 1, 2, and turned back to Ace. "Slow it down," he said like he was bored with our plot. We merged back onto the highway, saints of luck driving a rolling felony. We didn't speak for 5 miles. When Ace finally exhaled, he laughed, the laugh of a man who thinks the universe owes him another pass. I watched the mirror the way you watch a hospital monitor. The road kept being a road. The trunk stayed shut. The state line pretended not to notice us. We made the drop in a parking lot that had seen better deals and worse decisions and drove home $500 richer and somehow emptied of years we hadn't lived yet. I could romanticize it. Boys and the dumb glory of not dying. The thrill of being on the wrong side of a line and getting away with it. I won't. That day could have been a record with bars and a different last name for my children. The only difference between me and the guy who didn't get to make amends is a bored cop and a trunk that chose silence. If there's a God, and I believe there is, he was busy whispering into a patrolman's afternoon, "Write the ticket and let them be stupid elsewhere." Back at the store, Ace slid me cash without ceremony. It felt like hot metal. I shoved it into my pocket and bought my mother groceries because shame wears many costumes. She didn't ask why I was suddenly generous. I didn't tell her. I slept badly for 3 nights and better than I deserved in years. The thing about near misses is they don't make you noble. They draft guardrails you don't know how to read yet. Decades later, on a shoulder under red and blue and judgment, I heard the echo of that day in my ribs. You are not bulletproof, and mercy is not a business model. That officer handed me my life with a sentence I have since memorized in every dialect it speaks. Don't screw this up. The rule I taped inside our bourbon cabinet, 2 drinks, cap it, meet the morning on your feet, owes rent to that trunk and that ticket and a boy who mistook luck for skill. I tell the story now to kids I love and men who think they're math proof. I don't say weed until they're old enough for context. I say there are lines in this world you can't see until you trip on them, and by then someone else is writing your headlines. I say I know good men who didn't get the bored cop. I say I am not better than them. I am just here to clap for your small, boring ways of not becoming a statistic. My son, Noah asked once, riding shotgun past the old payphone lot, "Did you ever do anything big time dumb?" I told him about the Torino and the trunk and the ticket and the way the officer tapped twice and chose not to ruin me. He went very quiet in the way boys do when a father admits something and the world rearranges. "Did Grandma know?" he asked. "She does now," I said. We drove another 5 miles with dignity in the cab and embarrassment on the tailgate, and then he said, "Thanks for telling me before Ancestry did." We laughed the guilty laugh that means the truth arrived on time. At work, years later, when I wrote Trust Verify on a whiteboard and meant it like a vow, part of me was writing to the boy who let easy money talk him into a trunk job. People do wild arithmetic when cash sits near their conscience. Systems matter. Counting matters. The boring discipline of a deposit slip initiated every Tuesday matters. You can forgive quickly. You should verify quicker. It saved stores. It saved my name. It turned I like that guy into I can prove it. That tightrope act between faith and paperwork is not sexy. It keeps households and companies alive. Sometimes up on the ridge, I take the spiral notebook from the glove box and add a line the boy in the Torino wouldn't have been able to spell. Fog, Mercy number 12, the trunk stayed shut. Fog, Mercy number 13, a cop wrote a ticket like salvation. Fog, Mercy number 14, I grew up anyway. Then I put the journal away because the kids are asking if we can take the spur with the creek, and Mara is handing me a thermos and telling me to check the latch twice, and the life I almost cashed in for $500 is asking me to show up. I have learned that the best way to honor mercy is to become the kind of man who needs it less and notices it more. So I check the latch, I count the heads, I drive under the speed limit like a man who has seen his ghost in a rearview mirror and decided to keep the body. If a kid asks me for advice now, I don't preach. I hand them a wrench and show them the shutoff valve. I pack them a lunch for the day. Trouble forgets to pack its own. I say, text me when you land, and then I wait like an adult. And when they tell me later about the dumb thing they almost did, I clap like they just chose a boring miracle. The trunk stayed shut. The line held. The ridge still knows our names. That's the headline I'll take. Chapter 4, Rings and Fault Lines. Oak Bend, early marriage spring. We didn't start with storms. We started with a ring that wasn't expensive and a kiss in a courthouse hallway where the tile echoed like a church. Tara Lynn's laugh could pull a room into orbit. She wore her hair in a way that made men forget their names, and mine stayed forgotten for a while. We were kids with adult paperwork, two people hungry to stop being alone. The preacher who signed the license said something about love being patient, and we nodded like we spoke that language already. The apartment had a balcony the size of a bath mat. We could barely afford a couch and a mattress, and we thought that meant we were rich. I worked shifts that didn't end and came home smelling like coffee in boxes. She spun music loudly while she cooked macaroni and called it dinner, like it was a secret recipe. On Fridays, we danced in the kitchen, socks on linoleum, the two of us practicing a happiness we didn't yet know how to keep. The fault lines were thin at first, a slammed cabinet because I was late, a joke that went sour. The sudden way a room could go from laughing to brittle after a comment I didn't realize had teeth. I'm fine, she'd say, and the words would rattle like a bottle with a note in it that I didn't know how to open. Money made everything louder. A bounced check meant 2 days of quiet. I'd stand at the sink and count to 10 and then keep counting. Once I said, "We can wait on the new dress," and she stared at me with eyes that felt like a decision. We made up over spaghetti at midnight and swore to do better because that's what young couples do when they still believe effort can outrun gravity. The boys arrived like sunrise. Noah first with a cry that sounded like a promise. Sawyer next, quieter, already patient with the world. There are moments my memory holds like a photograph. Tara Lynn kissing flour off Noah's nose. Sawyer asleep in his car seat with a fist clenched like he was guarding a treasure. For a while, parenthood softened the house. We were tired enough to stop being enemies. We were in love with the same two people, which meant we were, for brief pockets of time, in love with each other again. But tired gets mean when it stays too long. The apartment shrank. Every bill felt like an accusation. Terilyn would pace the hallway while I dressed for another closing shift and say, "You're choosing them over us," meaning the job, meaning the strangers who got my best smile while she got whatever scraps were left. I'd say something stupid like, "The job is how we eat." And she'd say, "I know." In that way, that means I know and I hate it. On Saturdays, I'd bring home flowers like a bribe, and on Sundays, I'd bring home exhaustion like a stray dog I couldn't stop feeding. Some people fought with volume, we fought with vacancy. Doors would close softly and stay closed for days. She'd organize a drawer at midnight and say it was nothing. I'd wipe a spotless counter because it gave my hands something to do, then pour 2 fingers of bourbon, not to forget, but to dim the edges enough to sleep. It never became a friend. It was a tool I tried not to trust. I capped the bottle because morning kept arriving and I needed to meet it standing. There were good days. We'd load the boys and drive out past the city where fields still existed, park by a ditch, and let the kids throw rocks like kings. Terilyn would take off her shoes, tuck her hair behind her ear, and for an hour, we were a family so normal, it hurt to look at. She could be tender in a way that made me think we could do this forever, if forever meant today. But the weather changed without permission. She'd be warm, and then winter. She'd make pancakes, sing along to the radio, then vanish into a silence that felt like a locked room I didn't have a key for. If I asked, she'd say I was making things up. If I didn't ask, I was cold. Once she'd disappeared for a night without telling me where she'd gone, and I sat on the couch with the boys asleep and the TV playing something I couldn't hear. She came back with a story that didn't need me in it and asked why my face looked like that. I said, "Like what?" She shrugged. "Accusing." And then it was my fault again because I was always tired, and tired men are easy to blame. I carried the marriage like a heavy box labeled fragile and pretended it wasn't dented. I made jokes about us being stubborn and told anyone who asked that we were figuring it out. People love that phrase. It makes them feel like the world still has rules. Ray would show up with a bag of groceries and never ask why the sink was full. He'd help Noah build a tower of blocks and then leave with a clap on my shoulder, the kind that says more than any sermon. If I told him we were fine, he'd nod. If I told him we were not, he would have nodded the same way. Some men are faithful to not making things worse. That's a holy calling, even if no one gives it a verse. Anniversaries became performance art. One year we went to a chain restaurant and pretended the fries were fancy. I gave her a necklace and said something corny about forever. She smiled with her mouth and checked the time with her eyes. On the drive home, she said I was distant. I said we were both distant. She said, "So it's my fault." And I said, "That's not what I said," which is a sentence that has never saved a single marriage. We slept back to back that night and pretended we were just hot. I kept telling myself this was normal. Everyone fights, everyone cycles, everyone learns to live with the versions of each other that would never get along if they met on the street. I told myself we were loyal. What we were was stubborn. There's a difference. Loyalty is a choice you make with your eyes open. Stubbornness is what you call it when you can't bear to admit you picked wrong and stayed. The straw wasn't dramatic. It was 100 straws, petty, small, insulting in their smallness. A bill she hid and I found after the lights almost went dark. A lie so unnecessary it might as well have been a dare. A weekend she decided to spend somewhere I couldn't find. The way she'd look through me like I was furniture when I asked where she'd been. And then there were the boys, who began to sense the weather and look to me for a forecast I couldn't give. "Is Mom mad?" Noah would whisper. "No," I'd lie, because I wanted him to have one more night of childhood before he learned the names for adult storms. People ask when I knew. Knowing isn't a moment, it's a drip. It's dishes left in the sink and a text that doesn't come back and the casual cruelty of "you're overreacting." It's the way the photograph on the wall begins to look like strangers. It's sleeping on the edge of the bed because the middle feels like neutral ground and you don't want to trespass. It's leaving for work early just to avoid breakfast. It's staying late because the fluorescent lights at least keep their promises. It's pouring bourbon at the sink and cussing into the cabinet because the kids are in the next room. If this were the kind of book with a villain, it would be easier. But we were two people whose cracks lined up in all the worst ways. She wanted a love that would read her mind. I wanted a peace that required too much quiet. She tested gravity. I built guardrails. When the car finally went off the road, neither of us were surprised, and both of us pretended to be. The day the house emptied out would come later. Another chapter, another city. But the broken started here, with rings we wore like talismans against weather and a fault line we couldn't admit to, even as we tripped over it daily. And if I could go back, I wouldn't fix us. I would tell that younger man to tell the truth sooner, to listen harder, to leave earlier, or to fight differently, to stop calling stubbornness loyalty, to stop being noble at the cost of honesty. I kissed the boys good night and lay awake beside a woman who had already left in every way that mattered. In the dark, I promised God I would be the kind of father I hadn't had words for yet. Present, honest, boring in the best ways. I promised I would be the kind of husband who learned, even if the learning came too late to save this house. And I promised the kid from Red Creek that I'd find the sky again, because breathing had started to feel like a chore, and I needed the kind of air you can only find where the horizon remembers your name. Chapter 5, Trailer Season. Oak Bend, Trailer Park, winter. After the house went quiet for good, there was the trailer. Aluminum walls, a window that rattled when the wind got mouthy, and a bed too short for a grown man unless he slept diagonal and humble. It sat outside Oak Bend, near a lattice of pump jacks that bowed to the earth and rose again like penitents who had found a rhythm. Dust found its way into everything. The butter, my Bible, the creases of the cheap blinds. I paid $200 a month and felt like I'd outsmarted poverty. I could stretch a paycheck and still buy Noah that baseball glove and Sawyer a remote control truck he'd drive into every table leg in sight. 8 months, the length of a bad dream and an apprenticeship. You learn things living alone in a space that small. How to cook a complete dinner in a microwave without hating yourself. How to sit with the silence until it stops sounding like accusation. How to drink one or two and refuse the third because the third one tells lies. At night, I couldn't sleep. I'd walk the gravel loop of the park and count the porch lights, imagining the lives behind them, the TV glow, the murmured fights, the little mercies. Somewhere, a couple would be laughing, and I'd smile because laughter means someone else won tonight. The job kept me moving. I'd open a store in the morning, 2 towns over, drive a 2-lane ribbon through heat shimmer, close another at midnight. Managers needed pep talks, shelves needed facing, deposits needed checking, and I needed every single mile to keep me from pulling apart at the seams. I learned the map of Texas by the color of the dust stuck in my floor mats. The company card kept me in motel rooms where the ice buckets smelled like permanent bleach and the TV remotes had stories they wouldn't dare tell. I said yes to every shift because that was a way to say no to the kind of loneliness that breeds stupid ideas. Work wasn't nobility, it was triage. Still, I wore my name on my shirt like armor and tried to make the stores I touched a notch better than when I found them. On good nights, I'd call the boys, sit on the trailer steps where the phone got better reception, and listened to Noah narrate his day in breathless present tense while Sawyer added sound effects in the background. "We made a fort," Noah would say. "And we jumped," Sawyer would add. "How high?" I'd ask. "To the ceiling," they'd both lie, and we'd laugh like that was a holy thing to do. After each call, I'd stare at the sky and promise out loud what I didn't know how to promise to a court. "I'm coming for you. It'll take time and papers and money I don't have, but I'm coming." Promises said under a moon count extra. That's a rule nobody wrote down, but I believed anyway. Trailer parks have their own liturgy. The old man 2 doors down, Vietnam cap and cigarette that never left his lips, would hose his stoop every morning like the world owed him cleanliness. He called me boss and never asked questions. When my alternator died, he appeared with a toolbox from 1978 and hands that remembered every engine ever made. He swore at the bolts until they obeyed. "Pay me with beer," he said, and I did. 3 cold ones he opened with his wedding ring. He didn't tell me if she was still alive. Some silences are a mercy. Storm season rolled in with its own personality. The first time the sirens went off, folks came out of their trailers and didn't move, like we were churchgoers listening for a hymn we might know. The sky turned a bruised green, wind threw grit at our faces, and somewhere a mother yelled for her kids in that voice that makes time obedient. I stood with my hand on the aluminum siding and felt the whole place shiver. That's when the word for me changed. I stopped thinking of myself as a man unlucky enough to be living in a tin can and started thinking of myself as someone walking through weather that would have humbled better men. Stormwalker. Say a name long enough and you learn to match it. I talked to God more than, not the pew God, the parking lot God, the God who doesn't mind if you curse mid-prayer. I'd say, "I don't need a miracle, just a nudge," and then I'd get exactly that. An extra hour from a reasonable judge, a kind manager at the DMV who didn't make a thing, a sudden refund check that kept the lights breathing. Faith for me was never trumpets. It was paperwork that cleared on time, a water heater that surrendered and then came back to life, a cop who let me go with "get home" when he could have given me a story I'd never outrun. The little mercies add up. They're a deposit in a bank where the currency is staying power. The worst nights were the boys' handoffs. There was a payphone outside a gas station off the frontage road, the sort of place where the soda machine always stole your quarters. I'd stand there with the receiver warm in my hand, watching headlights turn into the lot and then past me and then back again, the kind of waiting that makes a man rehearse speeches he'll never give. I did not win every handoff. Sometimes I watched taillights shrink and swallowed a howl because the clerk behind the glass didn't need my tragedy. Other nights, the papers were obeyed and I drove away with 2 sleeping heads in the back, and the kind of gratitude that makes you weep at red lights. I learned then that nobody's coming with a cape. You do the next thing, then the next. Evenings in the trailer had their own menu. Tuna melts, ramen with an egg if I was feeling gourmet, peanut butter straight from the jar when I couldn't be bothered to pretend the plate mattered. I kept a jar of pickles in the door because pickles make a house feel like someone cares. I'd hit the laundromat on Tuesdays, less competition then, watching clothes tumble in a mechanical ocean while the TV above the change machine broadcast a game in a language that didn't need translation. Home team, visitors, someone's always behind. People think loneliness is loud. Sometimes it's quiet and useful. I taught myself to fix the sink without calling anyone. I'd learned the exact number of showers I could take before the hot water gave up. I figured out which radio stations wouldn't lie to me. I started reading again. Short memoirs, paperbacks left on a table by a guy moving to a nicer park. One line stuck. You don't rise to the occasion, you fall to your level of training. Trailer season was training. Training in the art of choosing the next right thing when the rest of your life refused to line up. There were women, not many, not for long. I was a storm with a shirt on, and decent people sensed the weather and took cover. I didn't bring anyone back to the trailer because a man has to protect what little dignity he can keep. I took dance lessons on a dare from a coworker who said I moved like a fence post. Turns out two-stepping makes breathing easier. A room full of strangers, a beat you can trust, steps that ask for nothing but presence. It's a simple way to be a person again. On Fridays, I'd drive to the edge of town where a honky-tonk's neon glowed in blue and red, a promise of something steadier and wilder than my own week. I'd keep my hat low and my expectations lower. And for a couple of hours, I could borrow a different life before returning to the one I was writing the hard way. Somewhere in that season, a sentence arrived and wouldn't leave. Send someone real. It wasn't poetry. It was an address on an envelope I kept handing to the sky. I didn't ask for fireworks. I asked for a woman who would show up on days without music, a woman who would make room for my boys and ask for nothing I couldn't give, a woman who knew the language of action better than declarations, a woman who thought forever sounded like groceries and a shared calendar and knees that touch in the truck on the way to nowhere. I asked for a miracle dressed in ordinary clothes. On the last night of the 8 months, I cleaned the trailer like a rental I wanted my deposit back from. I scrubbed the sink, Windexed the mirror until my face looked almost trustworthy, folded the 2 towels I owned with more care than laundry deserves. I stood in the doorway with the light off and tried to memorize the exact shape of the room because we had been in a kind of truce, this place and me. It had held me when the world did not. I had not broken here. I had learned to sit with myself without trying to crawl out of my own skin. I had learned to keep the bottle capped. I had learned to pray with my hands open. I locked the door, dropped the key through the slot at the office, and sat in the cab of the truck for a minute without turning the engine. The sun was dragging itself up. The pump jacks nodded again like men who had decided to survive. I nodded back. I was heading north soon, to a state where the trees don't apologize and the sky keeps its word. Not yet. First, there would be a dance hall and a Friday night and a woman who walked in wearing an ordinary blouse and a kind of steadiness you can't buy. But that's later. This is the end of the beginning. Trailer season did exactly what it was supposed to do. It took me from zero to almost something and left me hungry enough to go find the rest. Chapter 6, The John Wayne Call. Oak Bend, morning after. The morning after the empty house, my phone felt heavier than a hammer. I dialed the one man who never decorated a sentence. When Ray picked up, I tried to explain the kind of silence you can drown in. He let me finish failing at it. "Don't mess that job up," he said. Then nothing. No soft landing, no sermon, just that fence post line driven into the ground of my life. I hated it for not being a hug. I loved holding it. I needed both. I got one. I put the phone on the counter next to a dry sink and stared at my work shirt. It stared back, stitched its name over the heart, daring me to be the man it claimed. I put it on. The world didn't clap. It opened. I went. Work became the thing I could pick up that didn't argue. I made rounds like a ghost that stocked shelves. I opened a location 2 towns east, rolled out price tags that stuck better than some vows, then drove on to close another store that didn't know about my night. There's a kind of mercy in fluorescent lights. Nobody asks what you believe as long as the doors unlock at 9. I counted drawers, nodded at customers, made deposits like a prayer you can prove. I wasn't chasing a title. I was trying not to fall through the floor. When the shift ended, I drove out to Ray's place because I knew he'd have a chore that would keep my hands from becoming a problem. He had cedar posts stacked and a line snapped tight across a rectangle the grass hadn't agreed to yet. He said, "We'll set 'em deep," like we were talking about more than posts. I dug holes until the handles burned a pattern into my palms. Then we tamped the earth around the cedar and checked the bubble in the level like men who trusted tools more than speeches. He asked if the truck was running clean. I told him it was. He told me the weather might turn. We did not mention the house. Some men save you by keeping a subject off the table. I kept my bourbon where I could see it, 2 fingers to take the corners off and cap it. I'm not a man built for ascetic sainthood. I'm a man who knows how thin the ice is. After two, the voice that tells the truth gets blurry, and I need to remain clear. So I made a rule. I meet the morning on my feet, not my knees. The bottle and I negotiated, and for once I didn't lose. I cursed at ceilings that refused to answer back, learned which radio stations wouldn't pick at scabs, and taught my body to sleep like a soldier. Not enough, but ready. When I thought about calling Ray again, asking for more words, I realized I'd gotten exactly as many as I could hold. Don't mess that job up wasn't instructions. It was an invitation. It meant start with what is still yours to do. It meant don't let someone else's leaving define your staying. It meant if there's a thing worth doing within reach, do that first. Not everyone can teach you how to breathe. Some men just keep the oxygen on. He was one of those. Weeks slid by, measured in receipts and miles. I learned the shape of survival, coffee you don't taste, parking lots that feel like chapels, the clean ache after a 14-hour shift that proves you still exist. Sometimes, usually when the moon was impolite, I'd remember the boys in that curdled cup and feel anger bloom right behind my ribs. I'd shut my eyes, put my palm on the dash, and say it aloud to the empty truck. 0, not forever. It wasn't bravado. It was a stop sign for despair. Saturday came as it always did. I drove out to Ray's again. We fixed a hinge and said nothing about anything I needed him to bless. At the end of the day, he handed me a sack with a loaf of bread, a jar of peanut butter, and 2 apples. Take the good ones, he said, as if there were any other kind. I nodded and learned something I wouldn't be able to say for years. Some fathers write their love in groceries, some in fences, some in one sentence that doesn't sound like love until it keeps you from drowning. Mine wrote in all 3. Chapter 7, Honky Tonk Friday, Oak Bend Dance Hall, Friday night. 8 months alone will either make you desperate or specific. I got specific. Send someone real, I whispered to a sky that hadn't yet answered any of my messages. Not fireworks, not a fairy tale. Someone who can look a bad day in the eye and make eggs anyway. I didn't ask the sky for blonde hair and blue eyes. I asked for steady. The sky, being the sky, outdid me. Oak Bend kept its neon buzzing in a low, forgiving way. Friday nights, the parking lot out front of the dance hall looked like a car commercial filmed on a budget. Mud-kissed pickups, a Mustang that should have aged out of its arrogance by now, and 2 Harleys adding punctuation. Inside, sawdust floor, long-neck beers, someone who thought they could sing George Strait and almost did. I came to move in pattern, quick, quick, slow, and to borrow an hour from a life where rhythm made more sense than bills. I kept my hat low, my expectations lower, and my heart under foam packaging. Then Mara Quinn walked in. I saw steadiness before I saw pretty, which is saying something. There was a way she stood, shoulders like she'd carried things and knew exactly how much they weighed. Her laugh didn't audition for anyone. She wore a simple blouse the color of the sky when it's honest. When our eyes met, it felt less like voltage and more like recognition. Oh, you. Dance? I asked because there are questions dumb enough to ruin a night and questions that open it. She smiled like a woman who's learned to check a bridge before she crosses it. Let's see if you can keep a beat, she said. I've led a lot of things badly in my life. That night, my hands understood how to be gentle and sure at the same time, and her right hand on my shoulder told me everything I needed to know. She had tempo. We glided. We bumped into a couple of stragglers. We laughed. The song ended. We stayed. "What do you do?" I asked and winced. She tilted her head. "Interviewing me?" "Only a little," I said. "I work nights," she said. "Care unit, 2 kids. Their dad's allergic to paying what the paper says." She said it without flinching. I nodded without flinching back, told her I had 2 boys who loved dirt and distance, and she said, "Good." She didn't ask for the wreckage tour. We waltzed around it. It kept. I tried to be smart the next day. I didn't call. My rules had rules, and one of them said a man who can barely stand shouldn't invite anyone into the room. She called me. "I'm making dinner," she said. "It makes too much." "Are you hungry or proud?" I chose to be hungry because pride had been picking my meals and I was tired of being starved. I brought a 6-pack and left with leftovers and the feeling of having been seen by someone who didn't need me to perform. The kids were there, Faye and Kai, watching me with the unblinking stare of a stray cat that might bite or might purr if you didn't spook it. She didn't introduce me as anything. She let us circle. We found the distance that wasn't lying. Then I did what fear makes men do. I ran. I texted something about not being ready, about needing to figure myself out, about how she deserved someone less broken and more, whatever noble word cowards use. She said, "Okay." And that was worse than a fight. I danced with someone else that Friday and heard laughter I didn't like. The next week, I sat on the trailer steps trying to feel righteous. She didn't call. On Thursday, there was Tupperware on my doormat, a casserole that reheated like kindness. No note. That's how steady announces itself. With food that tastes like a promise, it has no interest in advertising. We orbited like that for a while. I'd pull away. She wouldn't chase. I'd find my way back. She'd be in the same spot, unpunished. The night my appendix decided it was done working without hazard pay, I called no one and tried to tough it out like a fool who thinks stoicism is a plan. The door opened like I'd invited her. "You don't look good," Mara said. I was on the couch with a trash can, and she had my kitchen pretending to be a kitchen. She took inventory, made a list with a pen she pulled from behind her ear, drove my truck to the store, came back with ginger ale, crackers, a thermometer, and the kind of calm that lowers fevers. The next morning, I had a clean sink and the memory of a hand on my forehead that wasn't trying to win anything. I didn't say, "I love you." I said, "You're real." She said, "That's the idea," and left for her shift like she'd merely returned a favor I hadn't earned. I met the kids properly 2 Fridays later at a park that minded its own business. Faye had eyes like a lie detector and held her brother's hand like she'd had practice being older than the calendar said. Kai told me he could do a backflip. I told him to show me when there wasn't a lawsuit waiting under the monkey bars. Mara watched, not for approval, but for truth. I didn't do voices. I pushed a swing and listened to a story about a math quiz and a missing lunchbox and the kind of heroics that happen when a cafeteria lady is brave. When it was time to go, Kai hugged my leg like he'd chosen, and Faye said, "See ya." Not a question. I went home and sat with that word, see. The dance hall kept seeing us. We learned each other's steps the way you should, slow, with space for error. I found her tells, the way she pinched her bottom lip when she did the wrong turn and tried to pretend she meant it, how she reached for my wrist when a song got crowded and people got pushy. She found mine too, the way I counted under my breath and I looked at the door every few minutes like exits might leave without us. We didn't promise anything, not out loud. The air between us held an understanding I didn't want to spook with declarations. Every now and then, I'd fail again at not running. "This isn't wise," I'd say. "You deserve easier." She'd shrug like a woman who has seen easy and knows its tricks. "Maybe," she'd say. But I didn't ask for easy. Then she'd show up on a school night I was losing with my boys. Noah insisting on being taller than math, Sawyer asleep in a pile of socks, and she'd fold laundry without tutting, pack lunches without commentary, and leave before I had a chance to ruin the grace by naming it. I'd stand in the doorway feeling like a man who'd just survived a small war he started, and I'd think, send someone real. I'd look at the sink shining and the kids breathing and admit it. The sky had delivered. I didn't know yet what she'd lose to bet on me. We weren't married, and the East Coast has a way of making paperwork act like truth. When we headed north for a promotion, the law would call her something less than a mother because there wasn't a ring or a piece of paper, and a judge who never saw her pack a lunch would decide he knew what was best. None of that was on the sawdust floor while we turned in time. That's mercy. Sometimes life lets you dance before the bill comes due. I took the dance. I held Mara's palm against mine and thought, maybe something. Maybe more than that. Keep the beat. Don't step on the sky's toes. Chapter 8, Northbound. Harborfield, first snow. The promotion came dressed like a rescue, new title, bigger paycheck, fresh map. I took it because saying no felt like an insult to the God I'd just started talking to again. Also because Texas had too many ghosts and not enough distance. Harborfield didn't know me. I figured that was a kind of mercy. We packed our life into a borrowed trailer and a bed of bungee cords, then pointed the truck toward a sky that got grayer the farther we drove. Mara sat close enough that her knee warmed my thigh without trying. Faye and Kai had spent the past year living with her. A small universe she built for them until a judge in a county too far for us to visit regularly made the final call. With no family nearby and flights the only way to see them, the ruling sent the kids to live with their father. The law is tidy on paper, but in motion, it breaks hearts with a stamp. I'd never seen quiet like the quiet in her after that hearing. It had edges. She didn't turn it on my boys. She didn't turn it on me. She just carried it like a second spine, straight and stubborn. Our Harborfield duplex had radiators that hissed like gossip and windows that couldn't resist a draft. 800 square feet if you counted the air above the sink. I measured the place the first night with the tape I kept in my glove box, not because I needed dimensions, but because measuring something is the closest thing I know to control. We made nightstands out of milk crates. We wrote the bus schedule on the fridge in thick marker like we were daring the week to blink. The first snow came early, muting the street. I stood at the window in my socks and tried to remember if I had ever wanted to live near an ocean you mostly heard about. The West felt far. The boys were flying in for Christmas, the couch folded out into a bed that pretended not to resent us. I could have cried from the beauty of it if I didn't have a rule about rationing tears. At work, I shook hands like I wasn't checking my phone every 30 minutes. The department wanted results, not backstory, so I wore the polished version of myself and saved the rest for the walk home. I learned which streets were greedy with wind, which corner store sold decent coffee after midnight, which manager liked to be listened to before being told. When people asked how I liked the East Coast, I said it's growing on me, which was true the way frost grows on a windshield, pretty from a distance, hard up close. Grief is a practical animal. It eats what you leave out. We put out bowls for it every day. A folded shirt left for a child who wouldn't wear it this week. A voicemail icon that wouldn't light. The court paper on the counter we didn't read after the third time because the words didn't change. I'd reach for Mara in the night and feel her tense, not away from me, but against the ache. I'm here, I'd say. I know, she'd answer. And I believed her. On Saturdays, I'd drive us to the coast, park where the wind could be rude, and we'd sit on a cold bench with bad clam chowder and better silence. She'd tuck her hair in her collar, and I'd watch her look at water like it owed her nothing and still gave her something back. That's how I knew she was built for long miles. I hadn't asked for a miracle, I'd asked for steady. Turns out steady can be a kind of miracle. When the boys visited, the duplex shrank in the best way. 4 toothbrushes in a cup, shoes by the door like a small army had decided to quit early. We strung blankets between chairs to make a fort that turned the living room into a democracy. Mara packed lunches like she had always known their preferences. Extra mustard for Sawyer, the apple peeled for Noah because he swore peels hurt his mouth. She never said, "My kids," or "your kids," not to them. To me, she said it once in the kitchen the night we ran out of space and patience at the same time. "We're going to have to be bigger than this place," she said, tapping the countertop like a map. "Yes, ma'am," I said and meant it. Sunday nights were the worst. A clock starts ticking differently when you've only borrowed your own family. The boys would fall asleep on the couch to a movie they picked, and I didn't. And I'd carry them to the pullout while the radiator whispered and the snow changed its mind about sticking. Mara would wash the popcorn bowl and not cry in the way that tells you crying is happening anyway. After we tucked them in, I'd pour us 2 fingers and we'd sit on the floor with our backs against the same cabinet. "Say something funny," she'd request. I'd try, and sometimes it worked. Other times, we just listened to the building creak around us, 2 adults who had gambled on a fresh start and found out the house always takes something. When the boys flew back, their absence jerked the curtains. I'd call from a payphone or my cell, depending on reception, leave a message they could play on speaker, make jokes about our plant that refused to die, tell them the snowplow was a robot with good intentions. I didn't say, "I miss you," because the word miss felt like an accusation in my mouth. I said, "Can't wait," and circled the next visit on the fridge calendar like a kid marking Christmas. When money got thin, we counted anyway and bought the tickets. Everything else could wait. Mara got a job at a care unit on the night shift because night shifts don't demand you smile. She came home smelling like antiseptic and Lysol. On her nights off, she learned Harborfield's bus routes better than I knew the managers' names, rode them to thrift stores, came back with a winter coat for Noah that looked almost new and cost less than the coffee I shouldn't be buying. I told her I felt guilty. She said, "Guilt isn't currency," and put the coat on the chair we called a closet. That's the kind of sermon I can follow. The day we decided we were done being polite to the future, it wasn't a holiday or a breakdown. It was a Wednesday. We were eating soup that had lied about being hearty. Mara put her spoon down like she was setting a trap. "I want them here," she said, meaning the boys, and unspoken meaning Faye and Kai in whatever way the world would allow. "Me too," I said. So we do the paperwork. We save. We make phone calls until someone hates us. We keep every receipt. We act like we believe the system will listen to poor people in a small apartment. She smiled without humor. "Big plan," she said. "It's what we've got," I said, and we shook on it across the table like partners. Outside, another snow started. I took that as an agreement. Chapter 9. The Payphone. Harborfield, Sunoco, January. There's a particular cold that lives in gas station concrete. It travels up through your boots and lodges somewhere unhelpful. The payphone outside the Harborfield Sunoco sat beneath a yellow light that made everyone look guilty. I learned its moods, the way the receiver stayed warm even when no one had used it, the way coins stuck if you pushed too gently, the way the clerk inside pretended not to watch me keep my spine straight. I called when it was my turn to hand the boys over. The rules were clear and pointless. We obeyed them until we didn't. "Where are you?" I'd say into the phone, eyes on the entrance to the lot. "On my way," the voice would answer. Sometimes hers, sometimes a boyfriend whose name I didn't know and didn't want to. I'd hang up because additional sentences don't make cars arrive faster. The boys would stand near my knee, one quiet, one narrating the passing trucks like he'd been hired to do it. When headlights finally swept the pumps, I'd crouch so we were eye level. "You're brave," I'd tell them. "You're loved," I'd add, because being brave without love is a recipe for trouble. "We'll count to 100 together," I'd say after I buckled them into the other car. "You count there." "I'll count here." "We'll meet at 100. They'd nod like a contract had been signed. I'd close the door gently because slamming teaches the wrong thing. Then I'd step back the way a man steps back from a cliff. Taillights would shrink. I'd count out loud because some promises need witnesses. I never made it to 100. I always lost track around 62 because 62 is where a sob shakes your math apart. The clerk, a kid with a pencil mustache and a boredom problem, started saving me the good coffee. I'd go in after, quarters burning my palm, and he'd nod toward the thermos like we were part of a club that never met on purpose. Rough night, he'd ask, which is what you ask when you want to be kind but not get pulled into a story you can't afford to keep. Weather, I'd say, because weather covers most sins. He'd count back my change slow enough for me to steady. Little mercies. The world got stingy, but it wasn't broken. Some nights she wouldn't show. Car trouble, she'd text later, or nothing. I'd wait until the clerk flipped the sign to closed and then a little after because hope, like stupidity, likes to make you late. On those nights, I didn't drink. I drove the duplex block twice just to convince my body I was still moving forward. I'd sit on the couch in the dark and picture the boys' faces tilted up to a sky that never learned our last name. I'd say their names in the room like a spell: Noah, Sawyer. The air didn't change, but I did. A man who keeps saying his children's names out loud cannot forget what he's supposed to do tomorrow. If this were a different story, a cop would have rounded the corner at the right time with a soft heart and a form to fix things. No capes showed up. The only uniform in this chapter was the one stitched with my name that I wore to work on 2 hours of sleep. So I became the cavalry I kept waiting for. I started a file box with labels that sounded like a dare: court, school, medical, travel. I kept a spiral notebook where I wrote down every call, every text, every time somebody was late or early or half right. Not because I wanted to win, because I wanted to be able to say here when someone with a clipboard asked me to prove I'd been a father. The people who sit behind windows will ask you for receipts you didn't know your life was printing. I meant to have them. Mara didn't ask me to be less angry. She asked me to be more useful. Anger is a solvent, she said once, somehow both gentler and harsher than the words deserved. It'll take the paint off a car. It won't get you where you're going. She worked nights, then came to appointments with her hair in a knot and her eyes steady. And when we lost a small battle, she would put her hand on my wrist in that way that stopped my mouth from making our day worse. Faye and Kai called when they could. We drove down when the schedule bent. She loved them out loud and in groceries, never in speeches. Watching her hurt without weaponizing it made me fall in love the way men don't talk about anyone but the truth. On my lunch breaks, I sat in the truck outside the county building and learned the rhythms of bureaucrats. Tuesdays were friendlier. Fridays were impossible. Mornings beat afternoons. I never wore the hat. I brought copies and the face I used for difficult customers who were still right. When someone said, "I can't help you," I heard, "Not like this," and tried a different door. I learned to say, "I understand," and "thank you," even when my chest was busy being a fist. I learned that the person who can say yes usually doesn't sit at the first desk. I learned that persistence is a language you can speak without raising your voice. It doesn't always work, but it works well enough. The boys' teacher sent a note home once, the kind they write when they see a kid is carrying a weight with his math homework. "He's brave," she wrote. I folded that note into my wallet and carried it like a credential. At night, when the payphone had finished breaking my heart and the duplex had finished pretending to be a house big enough for our hope, I'd take out that note and read it like a man studies a map. Brave is good. Brave plus love is better. Brave plus loved plus here. That's the combination we were building toward. The night before everything changed, nothing looked like change. The radiator hissed, the soup lied, the phone was a small animal on the table between us. "Tomorrow," Mara said, not asking. I nodded. We had a parking lot picked out halfway between lives, a pen, and a set of papers that had been passed back and forth through more hands than a hymn book. I didn't believe in easy. I believed in signatures. I believed in the way a woman looked at two boys she hadn't birthed, like they had come from a promise she made anyway. I believed in the strange, stubborn mercy of a world where a payphone could still hear a father say, count to 100, and mean, I'm not leaving before you do. Chapter 10, Parking Lot Papers. Harborfield, Wednesday noon. The day we stopped being polite to fate started like any other Wednesday. Cheap coffee, the radiator hissing opinions, Mara tying her hair back like she was going to war with banality. I took the file box off the fridge where it lived like a trophy we hadn't earned yet. Inside, tabs I'd labeled in block letters that made my hand look steadier than I was. Court, school, medical, travel, MISC. The pin I trusted most rode the spine on a strip of tape like a lifeline. We didn't dress up. There's no reason to put on a SWAT for a battle that's going to happen between two parking stripes. We drove in a weather that couldn't decide. On the way, I practiced the sentences that wouldn't make anything worse. Thank you for meeting us. I'll keep you updated. No child support. The last one tasted like pennies in my mouth. It was the currency I had, the only one I could lay down that might buy the stability the boys needed. I didn't want her money. I wanted their mornings. The lot we picked was halfway between lives, a grocery with a line of shopping carts that did not care about jurisdiction. The asphalt had cracks that had learned to bloom. I parked where I could see every entrance. Mara leaned her head back and shut her eyes like praying, but not. I put my hand on her knee and she put her hand on mine. We didn't say anything because we'd already said everything in late night budgets and doctor bills that came to our address even when our last names didn't count. We watched for headlights we knew and we waited. They came on time for once. A sedan with a dent like a memory took the corner softly and slid into a space across from us. She got out first, Tara Lynn in a jacket that looked warmer than her eyes. No diagnosis, no labels, no whispered explanations to give weight to what had been weightless and shifting for years. Just a person who had decided today to sign something that would change 4 lives and a little more. The boys climbed out behind her, one taller, one still built like a question mark, carrying backpacks that were full of everything and nothing. 2 t-shirts, a comic book, a plastic dinosaur with a missing tail. This was the moment we secured custody of the boys with no demands, just full custody and nothing from her side. We didn't engage in grand speeches. Instead, I opened the folder like a bomb technician disarming a device, aware that the contents had consumed my lunch hours for months. Inside, I found papers marked by a smudged notary stamp, the result of a woman at a mailbox store pressing too hard. Our names were inscribed on the lines, carefully written, as if getting them right could somehow shield us from who we truly were. Tara Lynn signed where instructed, her movements mechanical. The wind attempted to whisk the pages away, eager to turn them into birds, but I used my palm to keep them grounded. Nearby, a shopping cart bumped against the curb, its squeal reminiscent of a violin warming up, while a car alarm lamented the monotony of the afternoon, its cries lost in the stillness. "You're not going to ask me for money," she stated, her voice tinged with uncertainty. "No," I replied. "This is about the boys, not about punishing each other." She nodded, avoiding my gaze, looking instead at the ground and then at the boys. There's a strange mercy in a goodbye that is quiet, a relief amid the emotional storm. She handed over the health cards with a slight shrug, as if the burden of responsibility had finally become too heavy to bear. "I'll call," she promised, and I responded with a simple please. I refrained from lecturing about follow-through. Lectures don't make phones ring. Noah stood between us like a referee who had finally been taken off the game. Sawyer held Mara's fingers and did that little boy thing where you test whether the hand you're holding is going to move if you pull. Mara moved the way you want steady to move, just enough to show she was there. We shook hands like strangers who were finishing a transaction neither of us could afford. I didn't hug her. She didn't ask. She turned, swung her keys once around her finger, got into the sedan, and drove away like she had someplace better to be. Maybe she did. Maybe this was the kindest thing she could have done for all of us. I crouched to the boy's height because that's where truth lives. You're coming home with us, I said. Is it forever? Sawyer asked because he had the audacity to hope out loud. I could feel Mara's breath hold next to me. Yeah, I said, forever. The word didn't crack. It sat down beside us and asked to be fed. We buckled them in like we were installing new hearts. Noah stared out the window like the whole town had been replaced overnight. Sawyer traced the fog his breath made and drew a rectangle, then another. What are those? I asked. Windows, he said, for our room. We might only have one, I said. Then I'll draw two, he replied and went back to work. Paperwork doesn't change a life. It makes the life you've already decided to live legal. The change was in the way the truck felt heavier and more stable driving out of the lot. At a red light, I looked at Mara. She was staring straight ahead with her mouth turned down the way it does when she's keeping floodgates from showing. You okay? I asked. No, she said, which is how I knew she was. Some answers are a pressure release. She reached into the bag at her feet and pulled out 2 apples, the good ones, and set them on the middle console like a sacrament Ray would have approved of. Presents, groceries, a fence, leaning, finally set deep. We drove home and made the room a room. Milk crates became shelves, a sheet became a curtain. Every pillow we owned became a negotiation. I took the file box and slid it under the bed as if that would keep monsters out. We ate spaghetti at the table that still wobbled on one leg, and Noah told a story about a science experiment that went wrong and right at the same time. And Sawyer asked if he could sleep in the shirt he was already wearing. It's clean enough, Mara said, which is a mother's way of saying, we won today. Hygiene can win tomorrow. Later, after teeth and prayers and the ritual of one more story and no, actually one more, after the kind of sleep that only children and men who have finally unclenched can manage, I sat at the kitchen counter and looked at the signed papers. There was an irony to their flatness, their refusal to be dramatic. I wanted trumpets. I got legalese. I poured 2 fingers for the both of us and capped the bottle after the second because that's who I promised myself I'd be. We touched glasses without toasting and listened to the radiator forgive the building for being old. The next week, the health insurance cards arrived with our address on the envelope. I took them out on the porch, a stupid grin on my face, and handed the cards to the boys like superhero badges. They stuck them in their wallets made of duct tape and pride. I paid a doctor bill without checking the balance first. We bought socks in bulk. I called the school and learned the name of a secretary who could move mountains if you treated her like a person instead of a gate. I started writing lunch on the calendar instead of a handoff. The world, to its credit, did not clap. It just kept turning and let us turn with it. At church the next Sunday, by which I mean the park bench by the water where we ate stale donuts and let the wind rearrange our hair, I bowed my head and said a thank you that sounded nothing like a psalm, but exactly like gratitude. I didn't promise God I'd be perfect. I promised I'd keep showing up even when the room was small and the bills were not. Mara leaned her shoulder into mine. The boys argued about who had more sprinkles. I decided this moment, this outcome, counted as a miracle. Not the parted sea kind, the we made it to 100 kind. The everyday kind you only notice when you've spent a lot of nights counting alone. I put the papers back in the file box when we got home, slid it into the hall closet behind the vacuum and the toolbox. I closed the door softly because some victories should sleep. Then I went to the doorway of a bedroom that smelled like detergent and crayons and little boy sweat and watched two chests rise and fall in rhythm. The house wasn't fancy, the job wasn't a crown, the bank account wasn't impressive, but we were no longer living at zero. We had something. We had home. I texted Ray a photo of the boys asleep, tangled in blankets, and wrote, "Set 'em deep." He didn't reply, which felt exactly right. The fence was standing. What else was there to say? Chapter 11. 4 kids, 1 room, Harborfield duplex, early spring. The duplex did not volunteer more square footage just because we added humans. It met us with its same 800 squared and challenged us to work it out. So we did. We turned the living room into a democracy with a constitution written in marker on the back of a cereal box. Lights out at 9:30, no hogging the fan. Whoever finds the lost sock gets to pick Saturday's cartoon. We stacked 2 bunk beds like Hope, top bunks for the brave, bottoms for the ones who fall asleep mid-sentence. 4 kids, 1 room, and a marriage that lived in the spaces between. Faye and Kai arrived on a Friday with backpacks that looked like they'd done a tour. They were polite in the way kids learn to be when they've lived in too many houses. Faye counted outlets like an electrician. Kai announced that he could sleep anywhere because I can hibernate. Noah displayed the Lego bins like a realtor presenting a sunroom. Sawyer offered the bottom bunk as if it were a deed. Mara made tacos, which is how you tell people they belong, without notarizing anything. We ate standing up because the table had lost a chair to a garage sale long before we came along. Night 1 taught us the limits of shared oxygen. Faye wanted the window open because she sleeps better when the outside gets a vote. Noah wanted it closed because Harborfield is loud in a way the West is not. Kai wanted the fan to point at his face. Sawyer wanted it to be fair, which in this house means rotate every 90 seconds. The argument grew arms. I stared at the ceiling and did not say the sentence that lived on my tongue. You know what would solve this? 2 bedrooms. Money is a quiet tyrant. I didn't need to deputize it. Instead, we held court over the room that wouldn't stretch. Money is a quiet tyrant. Window half, I ruled. Mornings were choreography. Toothbrush relay, cereal assembly line, 1 bathroom, 5 bladders, a ticking clock. I learned to shave with a child arguing about socks standing on the tub mat like a junior attorney. Mara sang the weather. I packed lunches with a seriousness that would have impressed the Pentagon. Noah's apple peeled, Sawyer's sandwich diagonal, Faye's with the crusts left on because she said, "I'm not 5." Kai's cut into squares he called nuggets. We tied laces, zipped coats, and poured the last of the milk into a cup that became a lesson in sharing. Out the door, down the stairs to the bus like a parade of soldiers that had been to war together. On Saturdays, space pretended it could be bent. Pillow forts rose like temporary nations. We instituted quiet hours not because we believed in quiet, but because neighbors do. Books traded hands. Faye read to Kai in a voice older than she was. Noah read to Sawyer while leaving out the boring parts, which meant entire chapters disappeared. Mara put laundry on the couch, and it turned into a mountain we conquered by folding in teams. Socks found mates that had been separated for months. I learned that if you make a game out of chores, kids will do them. And if you make a sermon out of chores, you'll be doing them alone. There were edges. Step-parenting is a foreign land, and I had arrived without learning the language. I spoke overcorrection fluently. I wanted order because chaos had stolen years from us. Faye wanted to be believed because life had taught her to pack proof. Kai wanted to be held without asking. I wasn't soft enough, not yet. I got mad at wet towels on the floor as if they were a referendum on my worth. I forgot that kids test the rules, not because they hate you, but because they are mapping the borders of care. Mara would touch my wrist when my voice sharpened, the gentlest brake pedal in the world, and I'd remember we were all new here. The apologies that followed were clumsy and real. I shouldn't have snapped, I'd say. I forgive you, Faye would reply as though she'd been practicing the line for both of us. We stacked those exchanges like firewood. We were going to need them later. Experiencing our lives together wasn't all learning. It was also joy that surprised us by being ordinary. All four at the park, inventing a game with rules so complex it required a constitutional convention. Ice cream for dinner? Because the fridge made a sound I didn't like and we needed an excuse. Movie night on the pull-out couch, Mara asleep by the third act, my head on her shoulder, a child's foot in my rib cage, and a dog we did not own but suspected belonged to us choosing our rug as its nap spot. We didn't take pictures because there wasn't a good angle. We took mental ones because we are not idiots. School sent home forms. We filled them out in the margins of our lives. Father's name? I wrote mine without the tremor I used to have. Mother's name. We wrote Mara's because she mothered even when the world counted with rings and paperwork. There were teacher conferences where a woman with a cardigan and a sharp mind would say, "They're resilient," and we'd nod like parents who knew the cost of earning that compliment. There were stomach bugs that hit like bad weather and left everyone a little humbled. There were birthdays celebrated with cake that tasted like victory because everyone blew out the candles at once and no one cried. My job was a rope, nothing more. District manager. I carried the hours, the calls, the problems no one else wanted, and still, the ladder didn't appear. I wore my name over my chest during the day and my fatherhood on my back at night. I trimmed any part of career that got in the way of bedtime. I was allergic to becoming a resume in a house that needed a man. There were late emails I didn't answer, promotions I delayed, trips I refused, because four heads in one room slept better when I was breathing their air. Year after year, I ran stores, trained people, cleaned up messes, and kept the numbers steady. I earned nothing beyond the title. No nod from above, no sense that the work mattered beyond the next quarter's report. The rope held me up, but it didn't lift me. I pulled myself along, knot by knot, knowing it might be the only rope I'd ever get. The people who measure success by titles will say, I chose wrong. The people who measure it by the quiet of a house at 2 a.m. will know I picked correctly. On Sundays, we found our church again, the park bench, the bad coffee, the wind that always wants to be in charge. We'd talk about nothing until it turned into something. Faye would braid Mara's hair with the concentration of a surgeon. Kai would climb me like a tree until I pretended to fall. Noah and Sawyer would build a dam in the stream that would absolutely wash away at the first real test, and we'd let them because failure in water is a dangerous teacher. I said quiet prayers that sounded like please and thank you, and help me not be the worst version of myself when we're out of paper towels. I was not a pew man yet. I was a parking lot man, a kitchen table man, a father who grabs holiness wherever it puts out a hand. At night, after the last, can I have water? And the last, no, really, last one, after marauding feet settled, I would stand in the doorway of the kids' room and take inventory the way I do when I'm afraid I'll forget. 2 bunk beds, 1 poster of a monster truck, 1 of the solar system with Pluto taped back on as protest, 4 pairs of shoes in a row that rarely stayed that way, a string of Christmas lights we never took down because joy doesn't need a season. and a fan doing its best to be fair. 4 kids, 1 room. We didn't have much, but we had everything. I slid the file box, court, school, medical, under the lowest bunk, because if monsters had to live anywhere, they should live under a pile of receipts that said we showed up. Then I turned off the hall light, poured 2 very small fingers for the grown-ups who had earned them, and sat on the floor with my back against the same cabinet as Mara. We didn't toast. We listened to the building breathe. "Say something funny," she whispered. "We're going to need a second laundry day," I said. She laughed the good laugh, the one that has nothing to prove. We bumped glasses. We made room. We were bigger than the space. There were nights the windows stayed half open, the fan kept turning, and no one complained. That's how you know a family is happening, not because everyone gets what they want, but because everyone decides to want something in harmony. We were still learning the song. It had a beat we could trust. We fell asleep to it and woke up to it and took it with us on the bus, into the kitchen, out to the park, and back to the room that kept getting smaller every time our love grew. That's the trick of love. It makes small places large enough. Chapter 12, Edges and Apologies. Harborfield Duplex, Sunday evening. The first real crack in my stepfathering wasn't a capital offense. It was a wet towel on the floor. I stepped on it in the hallway, cold and accusing, and said a sentence that came out sharper than I meant. "How hard is it to hang a towel?" Faye was at the sink, hair in a knot, jaw set. She didn't turn. "It slipped," she said, which is how a child tells you she's already having a day. I doubled down anyway, like a man mistaking control for care. "We're not running a YMCA." The room went taut. Mara put a mug on the counter too gently. "That's her tell." She touched my wrist, a private brake pedal. "Babe," she said, soft as a thread. That one word made me hear my own voice from the hallway, and it wasn't a voice I liked. I picked up the towel, hung it, and stood there like an idiot who'd brought a sledgehammer to a tea party. Steparenting is a job description nobody writes a clean manual for. I wanted order because chaos had stolen years from us. Faye wanted to be believed. Life had taught her to carry proof. Kai wanted to be held, no questions asked. I tried to fix everything with rules. Rules are easy. Patience is labor. I took the easy path until it cost more than I could pay. The science fair board was my real failure. Faye's idea was clever. Why does the same plant grow differently in different light? My contribution should have been tape and snacks. Instead, I turned into a project manager no one hired. Center your headline, fewer fonts, let's chart it. She swallowed everything I said until the letters stopped looking like hers. At midnight, the board looked perfect and dead. She blinked fast, refusing the first tear. "It doesn't feel like mine," she said. I heard Ray in my head, set him deep, and hated that I'd planted the wrong thing. "Okay," I said, too late, but still. "Tell me what you want it to look like." We pulled everything off and started over on the kitchen floor. Crooked letters, smudged glue, a drawing of a sun that looked like a fried egg. It breathed again. We fell asleep at 2 with glitter in our hair. At school, she stood in front of her board and talked like the expert she had become in spite of me, not because of me. She won a blue ribbon that said honorable mention, which is exactly what a good apology deserves. I invented the 3-beat rule after that. Ask 3 questions before you take away a privilege. What happened? How are you? What would fix it? It's not scientific. It just slows a man down long enough to remember these are people, not problems. The first time I used it, Kai had put a baseball through the duplex window. I came in ready to lay down the law. "What happened?" He held his breath like a diver. "I was Spider-Man. How are you?" "Sorry in my stomach," he said, both hands over his belly. "What would fix it?" "Tape?" "Better idea. We fix the glass together and you mow a neighbor's tiny yard to pay me back." He nodded like he'd just been allowed to stay human. Not every moment was tidy. We had a week where Faye slept in her shoes, ready to leave for her dad's at dawn because being prepared felt like power. She snapped at me over cereal. I snapped back. She flinched. Not because she's fragile, but because volume never makes a child feel safer. I put my hands flat on the table. That's on me, I said. I'm sorry, she breathed. I forgive you. But can you not do the voice? I didn't know I had a voice. I started killing it, one hallway at a time. I took each kid on a drive-in Dr. Pepper apology tour. No speeches, just the two of us, windows down, the kind of static-free conversation that only happens when you're both looking at the road. To Noah, I said, I push too hard sometimes because I want you ready for a world that doesn't care if you're tired. He said, I know, which meant keep trying. To Sawyer, I keep teasing when you've tapped out. I'll stop. He said, you can tease twice, which felt like a treaty. To Faye, I was harder on you because you left and came back and I was scared you'd leave again. She said, I might sometimes, but I will come back. To Kai, I will not make you earn softness. He put his palm on my cheek like he was blessing a man who needed it. Mara and I made house rules you could fit on a receipt. No secrets. Say it plain. Be where you said you'd be. I'll fix what you break, with help if you need it. I'll try again tomorrow. We taped them to the fridge with dinosaur magnets. The rules didn't change the world. They made the world inside of our door honest. We enforced them with the kind of consistency that looks boring from far away and saves lives up close. I learned how to apologize without a paragraph. I was wrong. I'm sorry. Will you forgive me? That last question is the hardest because it hands the power to the person you failed. Sometimes forgiveness is instant. Sometimes it's a process. Either way, the question respects the wound. We patched those apologies together like quilt squares. When winter came, as it always does, we had something to keep us from unraveling. One Sunday, during a quiet hour, Faye was again braiding Mara's hair while I folded laundry in mechanical repentance. You look less mad now, Faye said, not unkind. I'm less wrong now, I said. She smiled, a real one, then misjudged a braid and laughed at herself. When lights went out that night, she whispered from the top bunk, Night, Dad. It was soft, a slip I pretended not to notice, but I lay there in the dark, a careful man finally allowed to breathe like a grateful one. The trick wasn't becoming perfect. It was learning to be safe. Discipline without tenderness is laziness dressed in a badge. Tenderness without discipline is fear pretending to be love. We were building something in between, a house where kids could break a thing, tell the truth, and still trust bedtime. I poured 2 fingers, clinked Mara's glass on the kitchen floor, and capped the bottle as was an unbreakable habit. We're getting better at this, I said. No, she said, we're getting practiced. We laughed, the good kind. Practice is a humble word for a holy project. I texted Ray a photo of the fridge rules and the kids asleep like puppies in a pile. He never replied. Again, the lack of response felt exactly right. Some fences, once set deep, don't need commentary. They just stand. Chapter 13, Guardrails. Harborfield Bypass, after midnight. The shoulder was gravel and bad decisions. I knew it when the lights hit the mirror. Red, blue, judgment. I eased over, heart doing double time like it wanted to outrun what I'd poured into it. The officer walked up slow. I could see my future in the reflection on his sunglasses, a company car idling, a man about to make the dumbest night of his life official. You been drinking, sir? Yes, I said, because lying would taste worse. A couple. Step out. The air bit. My boots slid a little on the small stones. He ran me through the ritual, heel to toe, fingertip to nose, the alphabet without music. I didn't wobble from whiskey. I wobbled from fear. Far away, a semi sighed like a tired horse. Close by, the beam of his flashlight sketched the line between who I'd been trying to be and the guy I could become in one more minute. Here's what's going to happen, he said finally, voice flat as a map. She's going to drive you home. You're not going to stop, and you're not going to screw this up. He could have taken my job, the thin rope I was clinging to. He could have made me the story I never wanted to tell my boys. He handed me mercy instead. We switched seats. I stared straight ahead and counted breaths, like a man learning to live again. A mile later, I found language. Thank you, I said to a dashboard that didn't care. When the second patrol car turned onto the shoulder behind us, supervisor back up, fate checking its notes, we had already merged back into traffic. The night let me keep my name. I got home and put the bottle on the counter like it was a witness. I didn't pour. I made rules because rules can hold you when willpower gets slippery. 2 drinks cap it. Meet the morning on my feet. If I'm angry, I do dishes. If I'm scared, I say it out loud. If I've got a choice between pride and people, pick people. If I'm tempted to turn into a speech, go take a walk. I wrote them on the back of a grocery receipt and taped it inside the cabinet where the bourbon lived. Guardrails. Fog notes. County lot, fog season. Harborfield is a town that manufactures fog. It rolls in off the water like a rumor and makes streetlights halos whether they deserve it or not. On a Thursday that had already taken more than it gave, I pulled into the county lot after hours and killed the engine. The building sat there, blind and closed. I stayed anyway. Okay, I said to nobody and somebody. Here's the deal. I'm tired. I need a nudge, not a miracle, just a nudge. That was the whole prayer. No poetry, a cuss word I won't print. Silence afterward that wasn't empty so much as patient. Fog slipped past the windshield like it knew my business. The best part of talking to God in a car is you don't have to stand up when you're done. Faith had started for me in a parking lot one lifetime ago, a whisper between receipts. This was different. The stakes had names and bus routes. We were out of good ideas and almost out of cash. The court date had moved. Again. The winter boots had holes. Theirs, not mine. And the thrift store had exactly one pair that fit and cost more than they should. Rent was a ball. I kept juggling with a smile the kids didn't buy. I wanted thunder. I got small mercies. Mercy number 1, the DMV clerk who said copies work. Mercy number 2, a nurse who bumped Sawyer up in line. Mercy number 3, a judge's assistant who answered on the first ring and said, I'll flag it. None of it was fireworks. All of it was oxygen. I don't need trumpets. I need air. I kept a small battered spiral in the truck. Fog journal, I called it. Not gratitude exactly, more like a witness log. Fog number 12. Trunk stayed shut. FOG number 13. Cop wrote a ticket like salvation. FOG number 14. I grew up anyway. At dawn, the mist lifted not in a movie way, no sudden reveal, just enough to see the lane markers. The lot stayed ugly, the building stayed brick. None of that changed the fact that the road back to the duplex didn't feel like a question mark anymore. It felt like a sentence you could finish without lying. Chapter 14. Trust, verify. Those rules didn't stay taped inside a cabinet. They followed me to work. Not saved, not sainted, steady, that's what I was aiming for. The guardrails turned into habits, quiet ones that kept me from breaking the good things, 2 drinks, cap it, meet the morning on my feet, drive time, prayers only, no sermons over spaghetti. Anger goes to dishes, fear gets said out loud, boring rules, honest results. Friday nights, dance hall neon tugging at old ghosts. I kept count, office parties, weddings, business trips. I learned to love coffee after 10. When the edge showed up, I let hot water and soap save me. There's holiness in a sink full of plates when your temper wants to do something permanent. The rules bled into other corners, work, marriage, fatherhood, all of it steadier. Guardrails don't make you perfect. They make you predictable to the people who need you. Trust and verify. The number one guy on my board had the smile, the numbers, the team that would run through drywall for him. At the regional meeting, we ranked managers, and I lobbied for him like a campaigner. 2 months later, I opened my email and felt the floor tilt. Subject line, resignation/apology. He confessed to rolling cash deposits for half a year, taking from Monday to cover Friday until the snake finally ate its tail. I hadn't checked. I'd stopped flipping deposit slips because I trusted him. I had let charisma rent space where diligence was supposed to live. My credibility took the hit. His conscience spread around. So I wrote a new rule on the back of that same receipt. Trust, verify, not the bumper sticker version, the kind with initials and dates. I went store to store, binder by binder. Managers stiffened until I said the quiet part out loud. This is my failure before it's yours. They relaxed. We counted reality together. I found 2 more rolling attempts before they became crimes and a dozen good people doing good work that no one had noticed. I praised them in writing. At home, I told the G-rated version over tacos. Even the best people need guardrails, I said. Mara added, even the best dads. She wasn't wrong. The hardest cleanup was with my boss. I walked in without armor. I blew it, I said. Here's my checklist. Here's the cadence. Give me 6 weeks and spot check me anytime. He didn't smile. He didn't crucify me either. Bring me receipts, he said. I did. Trust came back on layaway, paid weekly in quiet consistency. The whiteboard in my office now has 2 columns, trust and verify. Under trust, I write names. Under verify, I write dates. When a name moves columns because a human did a human thing, I don't erase it, I rebuild it. That's leadership. That's life. Guardrails and verification, same language, different dialects. They don't make a man flawless. They make him safe to depend on. And every Tuesday, I still turn in a stack of small, boring proofs that add up to a life I don't have to explain. Chapter 15, Fireproofed by Failure. Every store layoff year. The year the economy boomed, I received a new title, a larger office, and a view of a parking lot that never changed. The balance sheets read like bad weather forecasts. Stores were tired. Payroll was a prayer. The board wanted miracles politely. The people wanted rent money urgently. I wanted to go home and pretend the world wasn't asking me to trade sleep for survival. We renamed the crisis tightening because language lets you look a problem in the eye without crying. I walked the floor of every unit. Back rooms that smelled like cardboard, break rooms with motivational posters that had given up, shipping logs held together with tape and denial. I listened. The quietest voices told the truth first. Hours cut, tips down, gas up, toothaches ignored until payday delivered mercy, numbers explained trends, people explained the cost. We were rich in cost. I cut waste until waste started looking like people. Then I cut people. I didn't hide behind HR. I did it myself because if you're going to swing a sword, you should at least have to watch it land. I practiced the sentences that wouldn't make anything worse, delivered them across tables that felt too small for grief this big. I learned where to put the Kleenex. I learned that strong men keep their jaws set until the lobby is empty and then cry in the truck. I learned that You did nothing wrong is both true and useless when the rent is due Friday. I signed my name again and again until the signature stopped looking like mine. Home life got thinner. I'd come in late and sit on the floor with my back to the cabinet like always, 2 fingers poured and the cap set beside the glass. Mara would hand me a plate I didn't earn. She'd ask, "How many?" And I'd say the number out loud because hiding comes at a cost our house couldn't afford. She never asked for the details. She asked, "Did you tell the truth?" I nodded or I didn't, and that was our liturgy. The kids learned the way kids always do, by the temperature of a room. Noah stopped asking for new cleats and started saying things like, "These are fine." Sawyer began saving allowance without a plan. Faye tracked coupons like a sport and called it hunting. Kai invented a game where he rescued stuffed animals from a burning building made of couch cushions and looked at me after each save like he wanted to know if what he'd done counted. "It counts," I said, and we both believed me. The only time I lost it was a Tuesday in a stockroom where a guy named Marco took off his badge and put it in my palm like a tooth. "I'll be okay," he lied. I said, "I'm sorry," and meant it so much the word cracked under the weight of my pain. After he left, I sat on a pallet of products we couldn't sell and stared at the exit sign until it spelled my name. I wanted to walk out and keep walking until the air allowed me to forget I knew spreadsheets. Instead, I found a broom and swept a floor that didn't care who I was. When in doubt, a simple task executed well. The layoff year did something to me I couldn't undo. It stripped the resume voice out of my head. All the bullet points I'd collected, growth, margin, optimization, felt like good-looking lies if they weren't paired with the price tag taped to real people's lives. So I started writing the price on my plans. If an idea cost sleep for a mother of two, I said it out loud in the meeting. If a pivot shaved hours off the schedule, I named the faces behind those hours. It didn't make me popular. It made me able to look in the mirror. That's a luxury I recommend. We survived, barely. The line graph did that tentative climb back towards zero, and then, with shame, a little above it. Accolades showed up in email because nobody wants to celebrate in the lobby of the newly unemployed. I deleted the ones that sounded like parades. I kept the note from a store lead who wrote, "Thanks for telling me with your eyes before your mouth." The note lived on the fridge until the magnet failed. At home, the cost landed weird. I wasn't sleeping, but I also wasn't talking when I should. I started washing dishes when I got angry because the guardrail says, "Rage scrubs, love dries." I capped the bottle after 2 because the guardrail says, "Meet the morning on your feet." I stopped preaching over spaghetti because the guardrail says, "Drive time prayers only." Rules keep you from becoming the kind of man who would have made different mistakes under the same pressure. I wasn't about to rewrite the list just because the economy delivered its own opinions. One night, Mara found me in the hall, staring at the closed door to the kids' room like it might knock back. "Say it," she said. "I'm afraid I'm turning into a villain in my own house," I said. "I tell people they still matter right after I make them expendable." She took my hand and pressed it flat against the wood. "You're not a villain," she said. "You're a man carrying something hot. Put it down before you come to bed. That's marriage. A woman reminding you you're not your worst headline." On a Sunday, when the fog let us keep the horizon, we drove to a ridge that knew nothing about head count. The boys ran ahead. Mara turned her face into the wind, quiet and steady. I stood where the wind had no boss and felt my chest open a notch. Work is a rope. Family is air. The West is medicine. For once, I stopped fighting the cure and started letting it work. The year ended not with a party, but with pancakes burned a little because we were laughing. We stacked them 4 plates high and called it prosperity. I wasn't proud of what I'd done. Pride is the wrong word. I was grateful we were still us. The house wasn't fancy. The bank account didn't care. The kids kept growing. The doors still locked. Morning still showed up. The miracle, as always, was the ordinary. We didn't burn. We just learned how to live near the fire without losing ourselves to it. Fireproof isn't immune. It's prepared. We were, we are, we will be. Chapter 16, Ridge Medicine. Mesa Ridge, June. When the house finally exhaled, no more bottles under the sink with their labels peeled from nervous fingers, no more court papers occupying the fruit bowl. The mountains started calling like an old friend who didn't ask for a recap. We bought a used camper with curtains that admitted their age and an ATV that coughed itself awake like a smoker who'd found God. The plan was simple and therefore perfect. Disappear into ridgelines until the world remembered we were small and safe. Mesa Ridge sat an hour and some change from our front door, far enough for phones to forget their manners, close enough to turn a bad day into a salvageable one by sunset. The first time we hauled up there with all 4 kids and 2 coolers of groceries like we were preparing for siege, the sky flicked its light switch and the whole family went quiet in that greedy, happy way. Noah hopped out and breathed like he'd invented the air. Sawyer found a stick worthy of knighthood and dubbed every rock a citizen. Faye posted up with a paperback and pretended not to smile. Kai climbed the trailer tongue and announced he could see the future. I believed him. We learned the ridge's moods: wind that liked to show off around dinner, afternoon storms with a sense of timing, coyotes that sang after the second s'more. We learned on our own, too. In town, we could calculate around the petty. Up here, the pettiness couldn't survive altitude. The propane stove hissed rude and forgiving. The coffee tasted like the apologies you meant. Our fights got quieter, our laughter got louder. The West did what churches try to. It made us smaller without making us less. We kept traditions sloppy and therefore sustainable. Friday packout was chaos, paper towels, headlamps, the mystery tote labeled camp kitchen that might contain a whisk or a flare. Mara ran inventory with her chin, hands already busy doing 3 things that made 5 more possible. My contribution was mechanical. Tie downs, tire pressure, the eternal question of whether the cooler was lying about being latched. The kids built their own jobs. Noah was fire chief. Sawyer was map captain, even when the map was my finger on the windshield. Faye was quartermaster and snack justice. Kai was morale. On the trail, I taught them the only gospel I know. Leave it better than when you arrived. We packed out other people's cans and secrets. We found a switchback that always gave us a view worth shutting up for. We stopped there so often it became ours, in the way a place never belongs to you but agrees to see you again. I kept a pocket knife sharp and my stories sharper. The kids learned the lore of our family at 5 miles per hour. The mattress night, the payphone, the parking lot papers, told in the kind of voice you use when you're trying not to scare anyone and also trying not to lie. They asked brave questions. We answered without flinching. That's a ridge of mercy. When you can tell the truth when the sky's this big and somehow it doesn't crush you. At dusk, we'd park near the lip of the world, set out chairs that had already lost 2 screws, and watch the light leave. Mara would lean her head on my shoulder like a woman who had graduated from survival and enrolled in whatever comes next. Say something funny, she'd ask, her nightly request for a detonation that turns brittle into bearable. Okay, I'd say. Why did the elk cross the road? The punchlines were never the point. The point was the way the kids' giggles cut the wind down to sighs. Some nights, after the fire went low and the stars started throwing elbow jabs, I'd walk out alone with a headlamp I forgot to turn on. The ridge has a particular quiet that stands up to your noise. I'd talk to God without moving my lips. Thanks for the boots that fit. Thanks for the judge's assistant who flags things. Thanks for the cop who said, go home. Thanks for the woman who keeps saying, breathe with me. Thanks for the 4 sleeping heavies in the camper who taught me how to be a victor without winning. I don't know if God lives on ridges. I think he at least rents weekends. Mara and I weren't saints. We learned logistics the hard way. The time I forgot to bleed the brake line and the trailer tried to reenact a cautionary tale. That night, we discovered the meaning of bear resistant the hard way and lost a bag of marshmallows to a 4-footed thief with better leverage. The morning the ATV coughed once and died, none of it made the ridge less holy. It made it honest. The kids learned that adventure has invoices. They learned how to roll a winch cable without losing fingers. They learned that weather makes tyrants of plans and poets of people. There was one evening that changed something in me as cleanly as flicking a switch. We'd taken a side spur near Timberline, a place where the ground stops pretending to be gentle. Clouds stacked purple on the horizon. I should have turned us around earlier. Pride urged me to keep going. Half a mile later, the weather made the decision for me. Hail like chickpeas, wind as opinionated as a mother-in-law, temperature dropping like a verdict. I got the kids off the machine and under the lee of a boulder, throwing on jackets we didn't think we'd need. Mara had that calm she carries in hospital hallways. She calmly handed out orders. The storm hit, did its worst, passed. We were fine, not because I was brave, but because we had prepared when the sun was still keeping its secret. Back at camp, the kids told the story with more drama than accuracy, and I let them because the headline was true. We stuck together and nobody cried. The Ridge promoted me that day, from show-off to shepherd. I've tried to keep the rank. Between trips, the Ridge was a quiet reminder of who we were before the noise. On Thursdays, when work tried to convince me I was the hinge upon which economies swing, I'd open my phone and look at a photo of the kids ringed by light that had traveled years to find them. Pride has a hard time surviving that kind of perspective. I said no to a handful of flattering obligations because a dirt road had penciled me in. The resume voice hates that sentence. My house loves it. We started marking the seasons by what the Ridge allowed. Spring meant mud you respect. Summer meant all 4 kids talking at once and the creek daring you to be cold. Fall meant elk bugles and jackets zipped to the chin. Winter meant staying home and telling Ridge stories until we could go back and make new ones. When the nest began to loosen, one by one, leaving with duffel bags and plans that didn't include us every Friday, the Ridge stayed. That's the trick of medicine. The dose changes, not the cure. On our anniversary, Mara and I didn't book a restaurant. We packed thermoses and drove to watch the sun do its job. I gave Mara a small scratched pendant shaped like a pine. No city, I said. She smiled. No city, she agreed. We toasted with coffee that had ideas above its station and laughed at nothing until it turned into something. The wind tried to steal our paper cups. We let it have one. It felt like tithing. I keep a box in the camper labeled ESSENTIALS. It contains a first aid kit, duct tape, a Sharpie, 4 cheap ponchos, a paperback of poems I pretend not to like, and a photocopy of our fridge rules. On the inside of the lid in my block letters, I wrote, "If you can't find God here, check your pockets." The kids roll their eyes. But when the fog comes low and the Ridge reminds us who started this whole show, I catch them reading the lid like it might be true. We still fight, we still fail, we still forget to charge the lantern, but the Ridge keeps taking us back like a forgiving friend. We go up crowded with ourselves and come down with space between our ribs. We go up worried about numbers and come down counting a different kind of wealth. We go up ordinary and come down ordinary, which is the highest compliment I can pay to a life like ours. The mountains don't fix you. They remind you you're not broken, just small and loved anyway. That's medicine I will take as long as there's gas in the truck and a sky willing to make room. Chapter 17, Rooftop. Answer, no. Washington, D.C., July 4th. The 4th of July threw money at the sky. We were on a D.C. rooftop, standing among people who wore confidence like cufflinks. Fireworks layered over the Capitol until the city looked photoshopped. A stranger handed me a wine I couldn't pronounce. I held it like a prop. Mara slid her hand into the crook of my elbow, heels steady on a deck that had seen more ambition than weather. She didn't shout. She never has to. You know we're never moving here, right? I looked at her, not a warning, not a dare, a fact. The kind that organizes the rest of your life for you. We're never moving here, I said back, to set the words into the night so we couldn't pretend we'd imagined them later. We clinked our glasses without smiling, the way you shake hands with a decision. I should say I had already been living here, Monday to Friday anyway. Fly in, suit up, polish the part. I slept under hotel art that featured generic bridges and rivers, the kind made to offend no one and move nothing. The chair company, e-commerce, retail, fancy back support for people who didn't bend for a living, loved it when I said words like optimize. They had me bi-coastal in theory and no coastal in practice, a man who owned a toothbrush and 2 zip codes and belonged to neither. On Mondays, I kissed the kid's hair in Mara's forehead and promised to FaceTime. On Fridays, I landed, wrung out, and used the weekend to pretend I was not slowly becoming someone who missed his own life in real time. We told ourselves it was temporary, which is the worst kind of situation. It's good for us, coworkers said, overlooking the part where us means more than a P and L. What they meant was, it's good for the company. I already knew better, I just hadn't said it out loud yet. That rooftop made the truth quick. The room was made of handshakes, the laughter had an agenda. Even the fireworks seemed managed. It wasn't that the city was wrong, it was that it was wrong for our house. We are dirt road people who can visit Marble when invited and return the key at the end of the night. The mountains had taught us scale. DC had taught us lenses. Only one of those helps you sleep. Say something funny, Mara said, her standing order whenever the air turned brittle. Okay, I said. This whole place looks like it's been ironed. She laughed. The real one, the one that makes me want to build porches and futures. I kissed her knuckles. We watched the sky finish its performance, and then, while everyone else was still clapping, we planned our exit, not from the party, from the thesis it represented. On the flight home, I wrote new guardrails in my notebook between initials and deadlines. Don't let a job put a permanent space between you and your life. If the road keeps you from the ridge, choose the ridge. If a city requires a costume, bring a jacket and keep your boots. I texted them to myself because phones make promises stickier than paper. When the relocation talks went official, I wore the right tie and told the truth in complete sentences. I can commute for a stretch, I said, but I'm not moving the family. Silence fell in the room the way it does when a man declines a crown. This is where the team is, someone pointed out, as if geography equated with loyalty. My team sleeps at my house, I said. It didn't land the way I felt it, but it landed enough. We reorganized. People with nicer resumes than mine thought I was nuts. They were probably right. About careers, about marriages, I liked my odds. Back home, Mesa Ridge kept its appointment with our lungs. Phones lost interest. The boys turned into silhouettes on the trail before our eyes could finish counting. Faye braided a rope from camp twine and decided it was jewelry. Kai renamed 3 rocks and declared them ours like a pioneer with poor cartography. The air made me greedy for nothing. We fell asleep in the camper to coyotes serenading the moon. I filed the rooftop episode under miracles you get to refuse. We still visited D.C. on occasion as required. We did the monuments in the rain and ate overpriced ice cream and laughed at our reflection in federal glass. Could you live here? I'd ask the kids, popping the bubble so they didn't have to. Hard pass, Noah would say. No ridge, Sawyer would add. Faye would shrug like a diplomat. It's nice to look at. Kai would tug my sleeve and ask when we were going back to the place where stars try to outshine each other. At night, after the boys were down and the dishes were loud, I'd set 2 fingers on the counter and cap it at 2 because the man who made that vow on a shoulder of gravel still had something to prove to himself. We did the math at the kitchen table and learned that saying no to a city was saying yes to each other. It wasn't heroic. It was arithmetic. Months later, the same rooftop sunset showed up in someone's social feed, all gold and policy. It looked lovely and far. I double-tapped like a good guest and put the phone down where it couldn't negotiate with me. We're never moving there, Mara said from the sink without looking up. No, ma'am, I said from the door. Some sentences keep their shape. Nobody gives you a plaque for staying, but the house knows, the ridge knows, the kids know. And when the wind pushed at our front door like it wanted a piece of us, we were home to lean back. That's the whole point of choosing, not the applause, the door. Chapter 18, Papa. Backyard, summer. The first time she said my name, she said it wrong, and it was perfect. Papa, like she was testing a new tool and found it useful. Wren, Noah's daughter, had hair the color of a wheat field that refuses to lie down and the kind of focus that means someone is going to have to move the world an inch to accommodate her. The day Noah put her into my arms in the front yard, sun blasting, sprinkler ridiculous, I felt my chest develop a porch. There's the time that lives before you're a grandfather and all the moments after. After is softer. After is dangerous in the best way. We did all the cliche things and none of them felt cliche. Wobbly towers of pancakes on Saturdays, garden hose baptisms, bedtime stories in a chair that had never held still for anyone else. She called when the moon was wrong and the monsters were ambitious. I drove across town to stand in the doorway and be gravity until her breathing matched the room. On the ridge, I taught her the only prayer I know by heart. Thank you for boots, snacks, and sky. She said snacks twice because she is not a liar. Mara became the grandmother she was built to be. No slogans, all logistics. Wren's bag always had exactly what tomorrow would want. The freezer stayed 3 emergencies ahead. If Wren liked a specific cup, another showed up in our cabinet without anyone announcing procurement. They invented a secret handshake I was explicitly not allowed to learn. I pretended to be hurt because hurt is part of the game and because it was fun to be rehearsed at loving like this. I learned the art of being second. Parents are the front line, grandparents are air support. My job was to reinforce, not rewrite, to spoil the day without spoiling the kid. When Noah's voice went tight on the phone, new job, thin money, sleep measured in minutes, I reminded him of a truth I wished someone had given me earlier. You're not supposed to know how to do this, I said. You're supposed to learn. He exhaled, taking in the wisdom I offered. Sometimes that's all a father can give a son. An exhale you earned the hard way. On Wren's second birthday, we went to the park. Balloons negotiated with wind. A cake leaned the way our pancakes do. Wren opened gifts with the care of a scientist. Examine, test, discard the packaging. She climbed my knees and announced she was a mountain goat, which forced me to become a mountain. All afternoon, friends and relatives took turns trying to get her name right. I didn't correct anyone. Names learn themselves. Back home, Wren found my fog journal, battered spiral, glove box veteran, and asked if it was a book about her. It is now, I said, and wrote Wren. Ate 2 blueberries, hid third in hair. For the future archaeologists who would need evidence, we were hilarious. She added a sticker that said, "Good job," because stickers tell truths that adults muddle with nuance. We built new rituals that borrowed from the old ones. On Sundays, we still took to our church on the park bench, only now our liturgy included goldfish crackers and a toddler's negotiation tactics. "One more slide," she'd bargain, holding up 4 fingers. We blessed the ducks. We blessed the nap that might happen later if the universe respected us. We named 3 good things out loud. Her list: dog, sky, dog hours, her. Grandfatherhood committed a crime on my pride in other rooms, too. I stopped pretending certain promotions mattered to me. I said no to a couple of rooms that needed my shoes more than my soul. Men talk about legacy as though it is measured with plaques. Mine lives in a crayon drawing of 4 lopsided people and a dog who is either running or on fire. We have not decided. I stuck that drawing in a lasting place of honor on the fridge. The resume voice in my head cleared its throat and left the meeting. There were hard edges even here. Loving this big means you invent new ways to worry. I worried about money I couldn't supply without insulting dignity. I worried about the world, which has started baring its teeth. Guardrail saved me from my better speeches. Drive time prayers only, no kitchen sermons while spaghetti is cooling. When I felt a lecture rising, I picked up the dish sponge and let hot water remind me I am not the main event in a house with a toddler and her parents. One afternoon up on the ridge, Wren climbed into my lap and fell asleep. I could feel her heartbeat and thought, this is why we said no to rooftops. This is why we learned to cap the bottle. This is why I made boring rules on receipts and posted them like scripture inside cabinets, so that I would live long enough and soft enough to be a mountain for a person who deserves better than my excuses. The call would come later, the one that would say they were leaving, that Miles had voted and we didn't get a ballot. It would knock pieces loose from us I didn't know we'd glued down. But that's another chapter. For now, we had a run of ordinary days that tasted like victory precisely because they didn't need a speech, a girl in yellow boots stomping a puddle into history, a boy I once carried calling me to ask how to unclog a sink without scaring the pipes, a woman who has built a life out of quiet logistics handing me a thermos and saying, "Go show her the switchbacks." That night, with the house pretending to sleep and the refrigerator humming like a faithful old dog, I sat at the table and added to the spiral, fog, mercy number 72. Wren says papa like the first word invented. Fog, mercy number 73. No one asked me for my title today. Fog, mercy. Number 74. Ridge remembers our names. I capped the pen the way I capped the bottle. I turned off the light. I let the ordinary finish its miracle. Tomorrow would be loud again. Tonight the door was locked, the sky nearby, the little shoes by the mat pointed toward morning. We are not at 0 anymore. We are something. And she knows my name. Chapter 19, When She Moved. Kitchen, Thursday night. The news didn't arrive like thunder. It came as a sentence on speakerphone while I stood with a dish towel over my shoulder and a pot refusing to boil. "Dad, we're moving." Noah said it like a man ripping off a bandage. Mara slid into the doorway, reading my face for the weather. I put him on speaker because truth travels better when it doesn't have to squeeze through one ear. "Where?" I asked, already pretending I didn't know the direction of this ache. "Prairie Bend." He meant far away, in a state where the horizon has edges and court papers get real fast. Noah meant Wren's shoes by our door turning into a holiday appearance, not a daily one. He meant a future I'd smelled and hoped I'd misread. I looked at the calendar where we'd penciled in pancakes like a medical appointment and felt the eraser Take it away. We'll help you pack, I said, because muscle memory grabbed the wheel while my chest sank underwater. We hung up with all the kindness two men can manage when both are trying not to blink too loud. Mara leaned her head on the doorframe. Say something funny, she whispered, but this wasn't that night. This was the other kind, the one where you don't pretend a cliff is a curb. We were quiet the way exhausted people are. Then the floor took us. We slid down the cabinets until Formica tapped our shoulders. It started with a couple of brave tears, then the kind you don't do in front of children. We pressed our foreheads together like a broken tent pole and let our bodies do their own weather. I didn't know you could cry like that at our age without breaking anything important. Turns out grief is elastic. It stretches. It doesn't snap unless you lie about it. Mara and I had practiced losing. We'd stood in parking lots while taillights shrank and counted to 100 out loud so the boys would think the world still had rules. We had trained in the art of goodbye. But a granddaughter is that porch you grow in your chest. You can't box that up and call it logistics. The sentence Papa rewired me. I had finally become a soft place to land. Now the landing strip was relocating. Packing day came with pretended cheer. Bubble wrap made its brittle jokes. Wren gave tours of her kingdom. My cup, my truck, my rocks. As if inventory would keep geography honest. I fixed a cabinet door that had decided to give in to its age and put the screwdriver back too carefully. You okay? Noah asked, which is how you know your son has started to see you as a man and not a job. No, I said, but I'm not dangerous. He nodded like we'd made a deal. Mara, logistics saint of 3 counties, labeled boxes in a geometry I envy. Kitchen, keep close. Bath, open first. Wren, her room. She didn't cry while she wrote. She cried when she found the little pink sock behind the dryer a week later and stood with it in the laundry room like a woman reading a telegram. Goodbyes have their own choreography. Wren climbed me, declared herself a mountain goat, and I became the mountain once again. I put my nose in her hair and memorized the exact smell of a kid who believes naps are for other people. Papa, she said, testing the word like a tool she might need for later. Say it again in the car, I told her. It counts extra if you say it in a different state. She giggled, unoffended by our attempt to make magic out of mileage. The truck pulled away. We stood in the driveway with our hands on each other like we were both guardrails. We went inside and did what you do when the house suddenly has too many corners. We cleaned. Wren's cup went on the highest shelf, not to hide it, but to keep it safe for a future that wasn't scheduled. Her crayons stayed in the junk drawer because permanence needs a place to live. The little shoes by the mat faced the door, maintaining their watchful place. The first week tasted like jet lag without the ticket stubs. I reached for my phone every night at 8 because that's when I usually got one more slide on video with 4 fingers held up. I got "we're settling in" texts instead, respectful and unsatisfying. On Sunday, our church bench by the water registered 2 fewer feet kicking at ducks. We named 3 good things anyway. Donuts. Sky. She knows our names. It felt like cheating. It also felt like faith, which is cheating that God seems to bless. I wanted to fix it. Men with tools believe in screws. I could Google apartments, ship job postings, sharpen advice into javelins. Every cell in me wanted to parent with a megaphone. My guardrails saved us from me. Drive time prayers only, I told myself. No kitchen sermons that turn spaghetti into courtroom exhibit A. Help me not to say, "I told you so," I whispered to the steering wheel. Then came the quiet fight. Distance is sly. It tries to turn loyalty into control. We took a breath and chose our weapons. Money we could spare, time we couldn't, silence we had to, words we rationed. Availability over ego, I wrote on a receipt and taped it inside the cabinet where the bourbon lives. next to the rules that kept me from becoming the worst headline in my own house. 2 drinks, cap it. Meet the morning on my feet, be easy to call, be hard to argue with. The first FaceTime fell to the cruelty of bad Wi-Fi and a toddler's attention span, but it was perfect. Papa, look! Camera pointed at a ceiling fan that had committed to its craft. Good job, fan, I said, clapping like a man who has learned the trick of small celebrations. Later, after the screen went black in that abrupt way that never stops feeling like an offense, Mara kissed my cheek and said, You did not preach. I'm proud of you. We toasted with water because bourbon would have been a lie about how well we were doing. We drove out 2 months later because love is a road habit. Prairie Bend was all flat honesty and sky that didn't apologize for its lack of mountains. We brought groceries because Ray taught me that some declarations belong in paper sacks. I fixed a leaky pea trap while Noah held the flashlight. We didn't talk about rooftops or ridges. We talked about trash days and the mysterious physics of toddlers who can hide car keys. When I wanted to lecture, I asked for the channel locks. When I wanted to say, come home, I said, proud of you for holding the line. That's the kind of sentence a man can walk around in without tripping. We set up Wren's room with stickers that won't pull paint, a nightlight shaped like a fox, a copy of the bedtime book we've been reading into bone. When it was time to leave, Wren put her hand on my jaw and said, Bye-bye, Papa, like a nurse giving a shot. I made it to the truck before my eyes flooded. On the drive, Mara watched 1,000 fences smooth by and said the thing I needed to hear. We didn't lose her. We lost convenience. The sentence sat between us like a third grown-up. Okay, I said. Okay. We held hands on the long straight and let the miles deliver their quiet liturgy. The house was the same when we got back. That's how houses are, but our version of ordinary had shifted. We moved the bench closer to the window where the evening finds us. We left a toothbrush in the cup with a sticker on it. We put the travel crib under the bed where the monsters used to live. We kept the porch light on at night, even though we knew nobody was coming. You don't have to lie to hope. You just have to make room. Here's the part I didn't expect. The ache became a kind of stewardship. Every time I wanted to control, I learned to build. Every time I wanted to fix, I learned to stand by. Every time the phone rang from a number that carried our last name, I learned to answer. With my mouth closed and my ears open, it wasn't heroic. It was just what had to be done. We were learning how to love across 1,000 miles. When Wren finally visited months later, she catapulted into our house. She inspected her cup, her truck, her rocks. She checked the porch, making sure nothing had changed in her absence. Slide? She asked. Absolutely, I said, and we drove to the park where the ducks pretend to be clergy and we say our amens with breadcrumbs. On the way home, Wren fell asleep in the back and my chest turned back into the familiar porch. That's how you survive a move. You make sure the porch is always there when the right car pulls up. Chapter 20, Letting Go. Kitchen, a quiet Tuesday. The first rule of long-distance love is that advice is expensive. You spend it, but don't always get change. I used to throw it around like Monopoly money. Then the miles taught me a better economy. Boundaries over lectures, availability over ego, oxygen over noise. It started Tuesday when the kitchen sink in, Prairie Bend pushed back. Noah called from under the cabinet, phone wedged against his shoulder, voice set to, I can do it, but I'd rather not be alone. Describe the leak, I said, kneeling in my own kitchen as if proximity could jump states. It's persuasive. I laughed and felt the old muscle twitch, the one that wants to turn every mistake into a sermon about planning. So I kept my hands busy instead. Guardrail, if I feel a lecture rising, I pick up a sponge. Scrubbing buys me silence, gives him room to think. I worked the counter until it forgave me for being myself, then talked him through the trap, the gasket, the cheap putty that always promises more than it delivers. He fixed it. He didn't thank me like a son. He thanked me like one man to another. When we hung up, I caught my reflection in the dark screen and faced it. You can't steer a grown child without leaving a mark, but you can show them where the shutoff valve is. That's something. Maybe it's everything. Letting go looks different every day. Some days it's saying, call me when you land, and then actually waiting instead of pinging a play-by-play into someone else's Tuesday. Other days, the reins are a 12-hour round trip to clap at a school play where your granddaughter's entire role is wearing a paper sun and wiggling like it matters. It matters. You clap like she saved the town. Mara is better at this than I am. She practices quiet availability with the precision of a nurse checking a pulse. She texts, "Need anything from Costco?" more often than, "What were you thinking?" She saves us from my mouth. When I forget, she touches my wrist, the same old brake pedal, and says, "We picked love," as if it's a team we root for even when the refs are blind. We did. We do. Not talking doesn't mean not telling the truth. It means telling the right truth at the right altitude. When Noah calls hot, I know to step back. "Do you want help or a witness?" I ask. It's a question that keeps men on speaking terms. Sometimes he says help, and I send a list of parts with aisle numbers. Other times Noah says witness, and I say that sucks, and sit there with him inside a silence that does more work than my speeches ever did. I keep a running list in the fog journal, a private ledger of the ways I am not the hero and still useful. Fog, mercy. Number 81, choose to listen. Problem solved itself 20 minutes later. Fog, mercy number 87, mailed gas card, no note. Fog, mercy number 90-something, held my "I told you so" until it dissolved. I'm not nicer than I was. I'm just tired of being right and alone. On Sundays, our church added a sacrament, FaceTime pancakes. Wren in a high chair 2 states over, us at our small table, both kitchens smelling like victory. More, she says, which in toddler theology means the world is good. We bless the batter. We thank the WIFI. We name 3 good things: her laugh, that fork, the way batter forgives. It's silly until it isn't, then it's holy. Road trips keep us honest. We load the truck with groceries we pretend are for them and tools we pretend are for us, then drive straight into the wide. On the edge of a prairie bend, I pull into a lot where payphones once taught me humility and say a quiet thank you to a ghost of a man who counted to 100 out loud so his sons would think the world still kept promises. Letting go, it turns out, is not forgetting. It's remembering without reenacting. Sometimes the story doesn't break your way. Paperwork grows teeth. Jobs don't care about holidays. People behave like the weather. In those weeks, I sent a text with exactly 4 words. Proud of you anyway. It lands like a warm coat, not a save, a layer. The kind a man puts on and says, okay, one more block. At home, the spare room evolved into a small museum of comebacks, a shoebox of drawings where we have been shaped like potatoes, a tiny hoodie that won't currently fit anyone we love, a nightlight that stutters sometimes but refuses to retire. We don't dust religiously. We let the objects keep their story, dust. When Wren visits, she narrates the collection and we pretend we've never seen it before. "What's that?" I ask, pointing at the fox. "A light," she says, insulted by my ignorance. I say, a light, learning to speak her certainty the way I never learned to speak anyone's theology. I won't lie. There are still days I feel tricked by distance. I want to throw my phone in perspective and go get my people. I stand in the kitchen and make fists with my brain. Then the guardrails catch. 2 drinks cap it. If I'm angry, I do the dishes. If I'm scared, I say it to Mara, who nods without pretending she can fix the weather. "Me too," she says, which sorts the world into 2 columns, together and everything else. One afternoon, a message pings, video, Wren in yellow boots, puddle, her mother's voice laughing as the water chooses the pant leg it prefers. Papa, watch, she commands like I hadn't been doing that with my whole day. She jumps. Water makes its argument. She roars a tiny, unafraid roar. I realize this is the whole test. Not whether she grows up near my porch, but whether my love is sturdy enough to stand wherever she lands and clap like she's center stage, even when my seat is 2 states away. I send back a video of the ridge, the one that keeps our lungs, whined loud enough to bully the microphone. Look, I tell her, our sky. She squeals like ownership has been granted. Maybe it has. Maybe the trick is to share what steadies us until the distance starts acting like a road instead of a wall. When Noah calls now, the conversations are short and better. You round? Always. I messed up. Do you want help or witness? Witness. This sucks. Yep. Okay. I'm going to fix it. I know. We hang up and both of us feel taller. That's letting go, not a door slamming, a hinge that finally stops squeaking. On the anniversary of their move, we drove to Mesa Ridge with thermoses in the camping chair that's outlived every season. We said the names of everyone we love into air that doesn't keep secrets and asked nothing in return. The mountains did their mountain thing, reminding us that we're small and not broken. To leave well, I said. To stay well, Mara added. We clinked lids and watched the light switch shift to evening. Some prayers are just a couple of sentences said where the sky can hear. Some miracles are just men who used to preach learning to bless. That night, back home, we left the porch light on out of habit and respect. The house breathed. The phone was quiet on purpose. I slid the fog journal from the glove box to the kitchen counter and wrote, Fog. Mercy number 100. Loved without steering. Fog, Mercy, number 101, they called anyway. Fog, Mercy, number 102. The porch is still a porch, even when it's empty. I capped the pen, I capped the bottle, I turned out the light, I let the ordinary finish its miracle. We are not at zero. We are not in control. We are here. And God willing, when the car turns into our drive, we'll still be the kind of people you want to come home to. Chapter 21, Wildfire Line. Mesa Ridge, late summer, red flag day. Heat stacked on heat until even the insects got quiet. And somewhere west of Mesa Ridge, the sky put on a bruise. We were already halfway up the forest road when the first plume showed itself, a gray pillar that did not belong to any cloud I trust. Wind's wrong, Mara said, rolling the map tight like a tourniquet. We've learned how to read weather that hasn't introduced itself yet. I turned the truck around on a 2-lane of powdered sugar and pine needles, eased us into a wide spot, and did the mental math of 2 facts that don't compromise. Fire moves uphill, and pride eats hikers. I wanted one more switchback, one more look, one more photo of the kids pretending to be taller than the timber. What I needed was to move. We broke camp like a pit crew that had practiced for a race we hoped would never start. Kai grabbed the essentials box I keep in the camper, first aid, duct tape, a Sharpie, cheap ponchos, a doe-geared paperback, and a photocopy of our fridge rules. On the inside of the lid, my block letters, If you can't find God here, check your pockets. Faye rolled her eyes and reached for the chocks. Noah folded chairs with the grace of a kid who's made peace with stubborn hinges. Sawyer did a lap for dropped spoons because the ridge keeps receipts. We were quiet, busy, breathing in through our noses the way people do when the air has opinions. Half a mile down, we hit the convoy, hot shots in yellow, a Forest Service pickup, a grader pulling off like a dancer, allowing someone else to step into the spotlight. A ranger flagged us to a stop with 2 fingers and a calm, that made me want to behave forever. "You're early," he said, which, sounded like a compliment and a warning. "We'll stay out of your way," I told him. "Good plan," he said. "There's a line going in the saddle. If the wind plays nice, she'll hold." He said she in the way of a man who has argued with fire and sometimes been heard. We eased past the crew and into their choreography, men and women shoulder to shoulder, a sawyer in chaps measuring a tree with his eyes, a drip torch who made a polite line of flame that looked like a suggestion the mountain might consider. I wanted to stay and help the way you want to hold a stranger's ladder. Useful, heroic, and maybe in the way. Instead, we drove because some salvation is getting small when the professionals get big. Half a ridge later, the smoke swung in another direction, and the world felt like it had dialed back from urgent to difficult. I pulled into a turnout that had once been a view and now was just a place to choose what kind of person you intend to be when someone else is doing the hard thing. "We make a drop," I said. "Water?" Noah asked. "Water, Gatorade, the good apples." We turned the cooler into a care package and handed it up to a kid with ash on his face who looked like he could still surprise his own mother. "You didn't have to," he said. "I know," I answered, because sometimes that's the point. Presents, groceries, set 'em deep, the old Ray Trinity travels. Back home, the wind delivered smoke like mail. The sun turned copper, and the neighborhood decided to meet itself for the first time all summer. A hose lottery broke out. People dragged sprinklers to fences. We raked a scrim of pine straw from the back fence and made our own humble line. You don't beat fire with a homeowners association. You beat it by moving the things that burn away from the things that must not. I kept catching myself doing triage, prioritizing the save, sequencing the tasks, mentally drawing swim lanes for a day that didn't ask my opinion. That layoff year rewired me. I couldn't see pressure without hearing the price tag whispering under the numbers. Leadership got louder then, and so did mercy. Today, both languages helped. Do the boring thing early, praise the quiet assistant, put your body where your mouth usually goes. By evening, the radio said containment had a percentage. Percentages make civilians feel like adults, like we can chart fear, manage loss, and call it progress. We grilled what should have been tomorrow's dinner, trying to taste something steady while the world smoldered a few ridges away. The kids drew a map of our yard with Sharpies and string, sprinkler arcs, rake zones, keep clear lanes. Mara put our passports and insurance binder in the tote that lives by the door and threw in the nightlight in the shape of a fox because hope deserves electricity. We slept in clothes. I kept my keys on the hook and the bourbon behind a rule, 2 in a cap, because guardrails don't care whether the emergency is internal or airborne. At 2 a.m., coyotes tuned their throats and the wind flirted with the eaves. I stared at the ceiling and talked to God in the only voice I trust at that hour. "Not asking for thunder," I said. "Just nudge the flags the other way." Nothing answered except the refrigerator doing its faithful dog impression. Fine. I got up, checked the truck, topped the washer fluid, and wrote in the spiral I keep by the glove box, "Fog, Mercy number 113. Wind shifted." Fog, Mercy number 114. Crew drank our water and said thank you like we did something. Fog, Mercy number 115. Fox nightlight packed without being asked. I put the pen down and the bottle away. Some nights, the only control you get is where you set your cap and whether you leave the porch light on for a future that might need it. Morning came dressed like a truce. The briefing said the line held overnight. Their line, not ours. The plume turned to a smear. School buses ran their routes without checking with us first. News anchors spoke in past tense the way people do when they need the comfort of relief. We drove back up later with a trunk of cold fruit and a dozen thank yous we didn't know how to fit into plastic bags. Char painted the earth in careful strokes. The saddle wore a new haircut. A woman with a saw on her shoulder waved us off kindly. Get small, get gone, get grateful. We obeyed. On the ridge's lip, where the view usually claims your words, I told the kids what I'd told them in other dialects 100 times. The best lines are built before anything burns. Bank accounts, bedtimes, the way you talk when you're mad, the way you don't drink when fear wants a co-pilot. You don't argue with the flame, you argue with yesterday's laziness. Then you do the next boring right thing and call it love. They nodded like they'd heard a Mark Twain quote where I was just confessing habits. That's fine. If wisdom doesn't sound like something you'd put on a t-shirt, it probably belongs in your house. That night, we sat on the floor with our backs against the same old cabinet. Two very small fingers poured for the grown-ups who'd earned them and capped on time for the morning. Say something funny, Mara requested, as always, the detonator for brittle. Okay, I said. What did the fire say to the line? She raised an eyebrow. Fair, I said. She laughed, and we listened to a building breathe. I texted Ray a photo of the cut line on the saddle with one sentence, set 'em deep. He didn't answer. He never does. That, too, felt like a kind of containment. We slept. No miracles, just air. And in the morning, the ridge remembered our names again. That's more than enough. Chapter 22, Paper Rings. Courthouse, Tuesday. I didn't propose on a rooftop. I proposed in a kitchen that believed in leftovers. The boys were at the table building a fort out of saltines and peanut butter. Faye was timing the fan's rotation like NASA. Kai had turned a colander into a helmet. Mara stood at the sink in a t-shirt that had survived 100 laundries, hair twisted up, wrists wet, the posture of a woman who has been steady for so long, it became her first language. Marry me, I said. No knees, no speech, just 2 words held out like a cup. She blinked once, twice, the way she does when she's scanning a room for exits that everyone else forgot to check. We can't afford rings, she said. We can afford vows. The boys looked up like I'd announced pizza. Faye froze the fan at due east with an index finger and narrowed her eyes at us. Mara turned the water off, which is her version of a drum roll. Okay, she said and smiled like a door opening. But I want something I can wear while doing dishes. We made rings from what we had, a grocery receipt and a strip off a manila folder. Faye cut them, Kai taped them, the boys licked their thumbs for no reason at all, and I slid paper onto her finger with the fear and greed of a man who knows he's out of his depth and intends to tread anyway. It fits, not perfectly. Perfect is a scam, but it stayed. We looked at our hands and laughed, the good kind, the one that means the room just got bigger. We didn't book a venue. We booked a Tuesday at the county courthouse, first slot after lunch, because the clerk said that's when people are less dramatic. Ray stood with us, hat in hand, boots that had opinions. He brought a brown bag with 2 apples, the good ones, because he doesn't know how to show up empty. The judge wore the face of a man who has declared 1,000 forever and still respects each one. He asked if anyone objected. Nobody with paperwork did. The radiator hissed. The pen scratched. Do you promise? He started. Yes, Mara said before he finished the sentence. She wasn't being rude. She was being accurate. Her yes arrived already practiced. Do you? He turned to me. Yes, I said because the long version was living in my pockets. We signed our names. The judge shook Ray's hand for no reason other than good manners. We stepped into the hallway light that made everything look newly washed, and the kids cheered like we'd won a trophy. We hadn't. We'd agreed to carry one. We took our reception to our church, the park bench by the gray water, and ate donuts that lied about being lunch. The wind bullied our napkins. Faye taped them down with the last of the ring tape. Kai fed a duck the wrong way and negotiated peace. I poured 2 fingers for later, not now, because the guardrail lives in daylight, too. Say something funny, Mara said, because even new vows need detonation. Okay, I said. The judge married us to keep the courthouse warm. She rolled her eyes and leaned her shoulder into mine. We named 3 good things: the bench, the paper rings, the fact that the kids had declared the fan a republic and were now tabulating votes. If anyone asks, that counts as holy. At home, we hung the license on the fridge with dinosaur magnets and the seriousness of people who knew what it had cost to get here. The paper rings softened at the edges by dinner. We left them on anyway. I wrote our vows on a receipt and taped them inside the bourbon cabinet with the other rules. Be where you said you'd be. Tell the truth before it festers. 2 drinks, cap it. Drive time prayers only, no sermons over spaghetti. Availability over ego. If we're mad, we do the dishes. If we fail, we try again tomorrow. We recite them at the sink, teenagers in grown bodies grinning at each other like we'd gotten away with something. We hadn't. We'd surrendered to something bigger and more boring and therefore more believable. The first night as a fresh noun, husband, wife, we did not clink champagne. We sorted socks. We wrote the bus schedule on the fridge in thick marker for the morning that was already licking its chops. I checked the door latches twice because the life I almost threw away for a good time was now sleeping in a bunk bed with a poster of Pluto taped back on. I tucked the file box, court, school, medical, under the bed like a talisman and whispered to a god who puts up with me. Thanks for paper. We'll earn the medal later. The radiator forgave the building. We forgave the day. We slept like people who had something to lose. We got banned 6 months after the paper rings, not diamonds, simple metals that didn't mind soap and sawdust. The jeweler asked if we wanted engraving. Yes, Mara said, and had them etch 2 words nobody else would understand. Count together. Monday through court dates, Friday through dance halls, Sunday through fog. It became a marriage language more than a motto. When people asked about the wedding later, where we held it, what we wore, whether there were flowers, I told them about a Tuesday, a radiator, donuts, and the exact sound paper makes when it agrees to become a promise. Some smiled like we were cute, some nodded like we were dangerous. Both were wrong. We were ordinary on purpose, the kind of ordinary that survives. Years on, I still keep one of those paper rings in the glove box next to the fog spiral and a dull pencil. When the day tries to convince me I need a rooftop, I touch the paper and remember that we built this on groceries, guardrails, and a bench. The resume voice in my head can posture all it wants. The house votes with lunches packed and a cap on the bottle. When I train leaders now, I don't pitch them on cap tables. I tell them about paper rings and Tuesday vows and how steady is a better strategy than genius. They don't always believe me. That's okay. Belief is slow. Reality is loud. It changes you whether you grant permission or not. Chapter 23, The Long Yes. Kitchen, every day. Rooftops get headlines. The long yes gets a house. It starts small. The way she sets a glass of water by the bed because your mouth thinks bourbon is the only solution to a hard day and your vows disagreed. The way you put the phone face down at dinner because availability over ego doesn't enforce itself. The way 4 kids share a fan and decide to want something together because they watched 2 adults practice and want discipline. None of it is romantic. All of it is love. The long yes is a word you learn by repetition. We conjugated it one grocery list at a time. Yes, I'll be at the bus stop even if the meeting runs late. Yes, you can take the last apple. I'll eat pride. Yes, we can drive to Prairie Bend for a 2-hour visit that burns a whole weekend and refuels us anyway. Yes, I'll cap it at 2 and meet morning on my feet. We failed at it all the time. That's baked into the project. There was a Tuesday I forgot the long yes in the sock aisle. We were arguing about nothing with the energy of everything. I reached for the weapon I've spent a decade trying to retire, rightness. Mara touched my wrist, the brake pedal, and said, "We picked love." I shut my mouth mid-sentence and went to get milk because sometimes the yes is "I will get the thing we came for." We checked out, apologized in the parking lot, split a candy bar with the sacrament solemnity we reserve for small salvations. Then we went home and were bigger than the house again. Kids will test your grammar. Faye came home with a grade that didn't match her brain. She wanted righteous indignation. I wanted rigor. We collided at the kitchen table. "Do you want help or a witness?" I asked, late to my own party. She thought about it, smart as ever. "Witness," she said. So I shut up and stayed. She solved her own mess while I learned to keep my hands off other people's agency. The next week, when she wanted help, she asked without needing a speech as toll. The long yes is a toll-free road when you build it right. Noah and Sawyer grew into their own pronouns. One night, Noah called from a parking lot where a tire had decided to retire. Old me would have grabbed keys and ego. New me said, "Do you want help or a witness?" "Help," he admitted. And I gave him the 3 sentences and the torque spec and let him be the hero of his own evening. He was. Later, he texted a photo of a lug nut sitting obediently in his palm. I sent back, "Proud of you anyway." He answered, "Counted to 100. That's our Morse code for still here." Mara's eyes look like logistics. She keeps a grocery list that predicts the future and a calendar that forgives the past. When the ridge is in season, she packs the essentials box with an extra poncho because her faith has a weather app. When I fail, sharp words, dull patience, she receives an apology without making me earn it twice. That is not softness, that is skill. The long yes is not anything you want, it is everything we said over time. My yes looks like guardrails. I meet mornings on my feet. I wash dishes when I'm mad so my hands can't do other work. I leave DC on the table and pick up the ridge because the resume voice has never tucked anyone in. On days when the old itch wants applause more than presence, I open the bourbon cabinet, read the taped rules, and keep my job, husband, father, man who doesn't need supervision, without demanding a raise. I fail. I try again tomorrow. Practice is not shame, it's training. We marked our progress in ridiculous ways. On the fridge, house rules on a receipt, annotated in crayons. In the glove box, fog journal entries that make no sense to anyone else. Fog, Mercy number 128 said this sucks instead of "I told you so." Fog, Mercy number 133 didn't preach over spaghetti, said it to the windshield later. Fog, Mercy number 139, left the porch light on even though nobody was coming, slept fine anyway. Once a year on our courthouse anniversary, we took the paper rings out of the drawer and wore them all day like tourists in our own beginning. The kids rolled their eyes, the grandkid clapped. We told the story, Tuesday radiator donuts, and then we did the dishes because vows never retire. After, on the floor with our backs against the same cabinet, 2 very small fingers and a cap set on time, Mara would say something funny. I'd try. Sometimes I'd nail it. Sometimes we'd just laugh because failure in the right direction counts. The long yes got loud during layoffs, quiet during wildfire season, specific when Prairie Bend stole our convenience, stubborn when the roof leaked, playful when the Fan Republic passed a bad law and chaos demanded a veto. It outlived 1,000 ordinary disappointments and 3 or 4 extraordinary ones. It carried us through jobs that mistook the word team for time. It chose Colorado over D.C. without hating either. It brought groceries to the fire line and a wrench to a son with a leaky trap. It kept us smaller than our headlines and bigger than the house. When people ask for marriage advice, I don't give metaphors. I give a list. Answer your phone. Be where you said you'd be. Cap it at 2. Don't weaponize the truth. Do the boring thing early. Ask help or witness. Learn your spouse's joke request and take your swing. Put groceries behind your promises. Count to 100 together. Then I tell them about paper rings and Tuesday vows and the long yes, and they nod politely and go looking for fireworks. They'll learn. The long yes turns into a house that breathes, a ridge that remembers your name, a granddaughter who says papa into a phone and believes the distance is just a road with manners. One night, years into being us, the power went rude. The house exhaled into darkness. We lit 2 cheap candles because romance is almost always a clearance item. We sat on the floor, knees touching, and listened to a city fail gracefully. I would marry you again, I said, because it had been a Tuesday for a long time and we were still here. Me too, Mara said, and held up her hand with the paper ring on it. The tape had yellowed. The receipt ink had gone ghost. The circle held. The long yes humming like a refrigerator in the dark. Outside, the wind leaned on our door and found it steady. Inside, the cabinet kept our rules. In the glove box, the pencil waited for morning. We slept. Not to applause, to ordinary. Which is the whole point. Chapter 24. Paper Trails. Home office. Rainy night. I started keeping proof the year I realized memory is a lousy accountant. Not because I didn't trust myself, because I finally did. The file box under the bed, court, school, medical, grew cousins. Fridge, rules on receipts. Cabinet, guardrails taped where the bourbon lives. Glove box, fog journal, dull pencil. And a binder labeled Paper Trails and Housemade Scripture with tabs that sounded both ridiculous and necessary. VOWS, KIDS, MONEY, MAPS, MERCIES. I wasn't trying to be romantic. I was trying to make it easy for the people I love to find their way when the day gets loud. Paper doesn't clap. It witnesses. The first thing in the binder is a photocopy of our courthouse license, creased like a palm line tucked behind a grocery receipt that became wedding rings. Next, our house rules written in block letters and kid annotations. No secrets. Say it plain. Be where you said you'd be. 2 drinks and a cap. Drive time prayers only. Fix what you break with help. Try again tomorrow. I wrote them on a receipt because a receipt is proof you traded for something. Then I added our marriage vows, same pen, same bad handwriting. Availability over ego, count together. If we're mad, we do the dishes. It all reads silly until the power goes rude at 2 a.m. And you need to know which drawer holds the candles and which sentence holds the room. Behind the rules lives a letter to each kid, the kind that doesn't masquerade as a eulogy and doesn't try to clean history. To Noah, help or witness. Keep asking it, even yourself. To Sawyer, your softness is not a flaw. It's how the hard things get carried. To Faye, proof beats volume. I'm proud of how you bring both when it counts. To Kai, you teach me to put the wrench down long enough to be held. And to Rin with the pen pressure light so the paper won't judge. Puddles are practice for oceans. Jump. We'll clap from any distance. The letters won't fix a Tuesday. They don't need to. They keep the Tuesday from lying about who we are. There's a tab for maps, but it doesn't hold directions to anywhere a satellite can find. It's a hand-drawn sketch to Mesa Ridge. Turn where the fence leans, park where the wind first gets mouthy, count 3 switchbacks, and stop where you always do, even if the view threatens to make you sappy. Tape flag to the map is a list of ridge rules. Leave it better, ask the weather twice, hot coffee is a sacrament, laughter counts toward burning calories God rents weekends. On the inside of the essentials box, we wrote it bigger. If you can't find God here, check your pockets. The ridge is not a place. It's a way back to ourselves with fewer words and more sky. The money tab is the least poetic and therefore the most loving. Budget printouts with highlighter scars, a page titled "When We're Tired, We Forget," that lists automatic bills by due dates and the passwords we change more often than sense demands. A one-liner that saved 3 fights last year. If it's under $50, don't narrate it. If it's over, bring a receipt and a joke. I learned during the layoff year that stress turns small dollars into loud accusations. Paper makes them quiet again. It doesn't make us rich. It keeps us honest. The mercies section looks like madness to anyone not living here. It's a collection of transcribed fog journal entries, tiny wins stacked like firewood. Mercy number 72, Rin says Papa is like invention. Mercy number 101, they called anyway. Mercy number 115, Fox nightlight packed without being asked. I copy them from the glove box into the binder because someday a grandkid will ask what faith looks like when you can't afford speeches, and I want to be able to hand them a page. This is what it looks like. Water at the bedside, the cop who said, "Go home," the judge's assistant who flags the packet, the morning arriving no matter what the night announced. There's a tab called Work that doesn't act like a resume. I wrote 3 sentences in it and meant them all. A job is a rope. Family is air. If work tries to put a permanent space between me and my life, I pick my life. That tab also holds 1 index card in my worst block print. Trust, verify, then write down how you did both. I added a second card when the startup years got loud. Do the boring thing early. Praise the quiet assist. Bring groceries to the line. Those lines kept me from turning my house into a staff meeting and my staff into a house. Every few months, I slip in a transcript, snippets from the podcast I accidentally built out of other people's comebacks, lines I want the kids to hear in my voice long after my voice is done being a problem. I don't keep the episodes where I sound like a conference panel. I keep the ones where a mother in an oil boom town says, "Dignity before dollars," and a laid-off dad says, "Hope doesn't pay rent, but it makes you willing to ask for hours." Those belong next to our marriage license more than another bill does. Somewhere else, out in the world with my name on it, there are official bios and clean paragraphs that explain the businesses and the books and the AI toys I've been building. I don't bring them in here. I keep the sentences that built the house, that built the men and women who will one day clean this drawer out and decide which of my scribbles mattered. One night, I found the paper ring we wore the day we got married, tape yellowed, receipt ink gone faint. I slid it onto my pinky and walked around the kitchen like a man who still can't believe the yes stuck. I put it into a plastic sleeve, labeled it in pencil, Paper Ring Tuesday, then taped a note underneath. If you're reading this because we had a bad week, put these on and go get donuts. Sit on the bench. Count 3 good things. It worked once, it might again. Instructions are a love language when you're not sure what to say. People think legacy is a speech. Mine is a trail. The day I'm done and someone has to open drawers that never asked for an audience, I want them to find receipts that say, "We kept our word when no one was watching. 2 drinks and a cap." The boys' immunization cards filed behind medical with the tiger sticker Sawyer refused to peel. The school note that called a child brave tucked into my wallet like a certificate I earned by showing up. The custody papers we signed on asphalt that never learned our names. We were ordinary on purpose, and we wrote it down. Paper doesn't clap. It holds. That's enough. Chapter 25, Set 'em Deep. Ray's Fence Line, October. Ray never used more words than he needed. The last month, he cut his vocabulary to weather, trucks, and the kind of sound men make when lifting something that used to be light. "Come by," he said on a Wednesday, which translated from Ray meant now. Ray's yard smelled like cedar and spilled gasoline, the smell of projects that refused to finish themselves. He had a string drawn tight across a rectangle of dirt that didn't yet know it was a fence. "We'll set 'em deep," he said, because there was no universe where the last fence he built would wobble. I dug the first hole while Ray stood with the level like a man measuring his own margins. We worked quietly into the evening, shameless about how much we trusted tools. At the tailgate, he handed me a sack with a loaf of bread, a jar of peanut butter, and 2 apples. "Take the good ones." It was a sentence and a will. The next week, he didn't meet me at the line. A neighbor waved me inside with the protective politeness you reserve for men who are about to learn something. Ray lay in the chair that had outlasted 3 upholstery fabrics and 1 marriage. The TV flickered sports no one was watching. His hat hung on a nail. "Hey," he said like I'd only stepped out for a minute. I took the other chair, and we started the only conversation he respects: how many posts were left, whether the ground would freeze early, whether the old truck was running true. We didn't wander into the field of feelings. We stayed on the road that got us here. When he dozed, I walked the fence line alone. The strings still held tight. The post we'd set had the quiet competence of men in their Sunday shirts. I put my palm against one and said what I couldn't say in the living room. "Thank you for teaching me how to build something straight when the world was intent on going crooked. Thank you for groceries handed like sacraments. Thank you for saying, 'Don't mess that job up,' once, and letting the sentence carry its own weight for 20 years. Then I went back inside and sat still until he woke up and insulted my posture. Hospitals want drama. Ray wanted a schedule. He lasted 2 days before he signed himself out with a muttered oath about gowns that don't cover anything worth covering. We moved a bed into his front room and agreed not to call it hospice because he hated the word almost as much as he hated the way it made everyone talk. I took the night shift 3 times a week. Mara took the afternoons and fed the nurses like family until they stopped knocking and walked in. The kids drew pictures of fences that never ended. We taped them to the window like talismans. On his last good day, Ray asked me to drive him to the fence. We moved slowly, 2 men pretending we weren't practicing goodbye. At the 3rd post, he put his hand on the wood and the other on the level and closed one eye the way he does when he doesn't trust the bubble. "Not bad," he said. I waited for a story. He gave me a sentence instead. "Take care of that girl." He meant Mara. He meant the one I asked to say something funny when the room goes brittle. "Yes, sir," I said, the way you answer a man who never wasted your time. We stood there until the sun reminded us we were not in charge. Then we went home. Ray went out the way he lived, economically. No dramatic last line, just a breath that didn't feel like the edge of a cliff until it didn't come back. I checked the clock because paperwork wants you to. Mara closed his eyes with the same nurse's hand she uses to place a thermometer and an apology. We sat on the couch and listened to a house discover a new quiet. Then we made a list because grief behaves better when it has a job. Call the neighbor. Thaw the casserole she brought last week. Find the hat, find the papers, and find the shovel. We didn't hold a service with microphones. We held a Saturday with chores. The men who knew him showed up at the fence line in clean jeans and said very little. We set the last post because finishing was the only tribute he'd tolerate. At noon, someone opened a red cooler and handed around sandwiches wrapped in wax paper. There were apples, the good ones. There was a loaf of bread on the tailgate like an altar. Someone told the story of the time Ray pulled a truck out of a ditch with more rope than sense. Someone else said he once replaced a water heater and a man's outlook in the same afternoon. Then we hammered a brass tag into the end post, Ray with the year, and nobody cried where anyone could see. That's not stoicism. That's respecting house style. I kept reaching for my phone the first week, like a dog goes to a door you moved 2 years ago. I almost texted him a photo of the kids asleep like puppies, the way I had after the parking lot papers, and then remembered the number was a hat on a nail now. So I texted anyway. Set him deep. No bubbles came back. It still helped. Grief changes what sentences mean. Don't mess that job up. Stopped being a command and became a liturgy. Show up, shut up, shoulder what's yours. Take the good ones became an ethic. Give away your best apples and keep your opinion about how they're eaten. We'll set them deep. Stopped being about fences and started being about people, kids, vows, guardrails, mercy, the boring lines you build before anything catches fire. I wrote those translations on an index card and slid it into the paper trails binder under a tab I hadn't labeled yet. Some lessons don't fit tidy. They sit there until you're ready to read them. Weeks later, when the wildfire crews cut a line at the saddle and the wind finally remembered its manners, I drove back to Ray's fence. The bubble still split the line like a judge. I leaned against the post with his name on it and told him about the kids' latest fan window negotiation, about Wren pronouncing Papa like she's inventing me, about how the Ridge keeps renting weekends and God keeps returning our deposit. Then I planted a sapling cedar just inside the fence, roots down where the soil still remembers a shovel. Set 'em deep. If it lives long, it'll throw shade on a man who once thought he had to be loud to be useful. If it dies, we'll plant another. That's the whole theology I can stomach. Keep planting, keep showing up, keep the bubble honest. On our next courthouse anniversary, Mara and I wore the paper rings until the tape tried to quit. We took donuts to the bench and split an apple in the middle like a promise. Say something funny, she said, the old detonator. Okay, I said. Ray would hate how sentimental we're being about a fence. She laughed and nudged me with her shoulder, and for a minute the world felt like a line that would always hold if we did our part first. I opened the fog journal, wrote Mercy number 143, post still plum, and put the pencil down. When we got home, I slid the new index card into paper trails right behind vows and before maps. I labeled the tab with a black marker that bled a little. Fences. If the kids ever ask what it means, I'll tell them about a man who taught me to prefer tools to speeches, groceries to advice, and one sentence that doesn't sound like love until it keeps you from drowning. And I'll take them out to the fence, press their palms to the cedar, and say the only benediction that fits. Set them deep, then go be somebody's line. Chapter 26, Paper Boats. Mesa Ridge Creek, spring thaw. The creek that splits the ridge is hardly a creek, 2 boot widths across in the dry months, a mouthier ribbon when the snow decides to share. We call it a river anyway. It's funnier that way. On the first warm Saturday after a rude winter, we carried scissors, a Sharpie, and a fistful of receipts to the bend where the water slows and pretends to be a mirror. The plan wasn't holy. It was practical. Fold boats, write truths, launch what we want to keep, watch what we can't control, and float how it wants. I tore a long receipt from the bottom of the paper trails binder and smoothed it against my thigh. It had the ghost of old groceries on it. Milk, apples, too many paper towels. Mara's childhood always makes us buy 2 extra. And donuts we swore were for the kids. The Sharpie bled a little when I wrote. That seemed right. Ink that refuses to mind its borders belongs to us. First boat. My handwriting, blocky and earnest. Be where you said you'd be. I folded the bow twice to make it less proud, set it on the water, and let the current decide the kind of sermon we were having today. Faye knelt beside me, hair in its usual knot of competence, scissors already in her hand. She cut careful rectangles from a manila folder and stole the Sharpie without asking, because family is a permission slip. Her boat read, "Proof beats volume." Not very poetic, I said. Poetry is what you do when your facts already win, she answered, an adult I keep mistaking for my kid. Her boat got stuck under a twig, thought about it, and slipped free without help. I pretended not to be proud. She saw anyway. Noah folded slow, thumbs pressing creases like he was insisting the future respect geometry. He wrote, "Help or witness." Then he added a second line in smaller letters, "Ask yourself too." Noah didn't look up when he said it on the water. I wanted to say 10 things about Prairie Bend and tire irons and the kid who calls me Papa from a state away, but the guardrail in my mouth held, drive time prayers only, no sermons at the creek. We watched his boat find the main flow like it had studied maps. That kid can steer even when he lets go. Sawyer made this from the ridge map we keep in the essentials box. He refused the scissors. "I want ragged," he said, which is how men learned to love the exact edges they were given. He wrote, "Count to 100. "Before you say anything dumb," he explained, which is exactly my brand of holiness. His boat wobbled, corrected, and aimed itself down a section of water that looked too shallow. It didn't care. It had a plan. I have no notes. Kai turned a receipt into an airplane first, reconsidered, and tried again. He wrote in letters that looked older than he is. "Fix what you break with help." Then he added a drawing of a wrench with biceps, which is the only theology I've ever understood without footnotes. His boat tipped, recovered, and knocked into Sawyer's like siblings in a hallway. They both kept moving. Mara printed hers neat as a nurse's chart. Availability over ego. She gave it a small push and watched it go with that inscrutable calm she carries through hospital hallways and grocery store lines. If the wind had changed just then, I'd have sworn she negotiated it. She didn't. She just looked like she could. I made another, the one I always make, the one I tape to cabinets and write on index cards and whisper to dashboards. 2 drinks, cap it, meet the morning on your feet. That boat is not romantic. It gets the job done. It also tends to sink gracefully at the bend, which feels like a parable I should understand by now. It sank and kept moving anyway. There's my life in one soggy metaphor. We launched boats until the Sharpie ran out of spine. Some drifted into a common path. Some insisted on their own routes. A few rolled, swallowed creek, and dissolved into pulp against a rock. Nobody rescued anything. Rule of the river, what makes it, what doesn't, teaches. On the walk back to camp, Noah fell in step with me. "You're going to write these down, right?" "In the binder," I said. "Under mercies." He grinned, half his, half mine, and kicked a pine cone into an argument with gravity. We do not need a church to feel like we kept our end of a promise. We only need paper that remembers, a creek that doesn't, and a family that floats both without demanding a refund. It's easier to teach boats than boundaries in a kitchen, but kitchens are where legacies live, so we practice there too. On the counter, we'd set 4 small launch kits we'd been assembling in secret. Nothing expensive, just tools for weather. Each kit had a flashlight that does not ask about your feelings, a photocopy of the house rules on a receipt, no secrets. Say it plain, be where you said you'd be, 2 drinks and a cap, drive time prayers only, Fix what you break with help. Try again tomorrow. One page titled Money When Tired listed the bills that always pretend to be surprises. A spare ridge map. Turn where the fence leans, stop where the wind starts to have opinions. A gas card with no note. An index card that read in my clumsy block letters, trust, verify. Then write down how you did both. There was a second index card in each kit I'd fought myself about for a week. It said, work is a rope, family is air, pick air. I didn't want to sound like a hypocrite. I've sometimes picked rope for too long, weekly flights to cities that iron their skies, rooms where titles walk in before you do, seasons where a P and L pretends it's your name. I've also stepped out of those rooms and back into my actual life with both feet, building our own work so the house could breathe, the recruiting thing that turned into rebuilding belief, the home maintenance thing that made clean vents feel like dignity, the robot repair thing because someone has to be the human when the future breaks at 2 a.m. Those decisions look good on a resume. They look better on our porch. I wanted the kids to have the line before the rooms started calling. We called it Paper Boats Night, even in the kitchen. We laid the kits out like we were setting for dinner. The kids, grown enough to roll their eyes, loyal enough to show up, found their names and tried to look unbothered. What is this? Faye asked, already skimming hers with a forensic calm. Paper boats you can carry, I said, for when creeks pretend to be rivers. Noah read the money page, folded it, unfolded it, and slid it behind the rules. This is going to keep 3 dumb fights from happening, he said. Only 3, I asked. We're ambitious, he deadpanned. Sawyer held up the gas card. No note? Notes make gifts into speeches, Mara said. Spend it on getting somewhere you actually want to be. Kai opened the flashlight like it might contain a rabbit. What's the warranty? Life, I said. Bring it to me if it breaks. I'll hand you another one and remind you how to hold it. He grinned. The good grin. The kind that forgives you for your past and dares you to keep showing up. We ate tacos standing up because long speeches ruin warm tortillas, then carried our paper rings to the sink. 2 fingers for the grown-ups after, a cap on time because morning's a tyrant worth respecting. Say something funny, Mara requested. Detonator of brittle moments since Tuesday turned into a sacrament. Okay, I said. I made the kits because I'm tired of you stealing my flashlight. Truth is a love language, she said, and bumped my shoulder with hers until a laugh climbed out of a day that had not asked to be good. Launch day came for each of them on their own clocks. Faye left first because of course she did, to a city that prides itself on buses showing up when they said they would. We loaded her trunk with boxes labeled in a geometry I envy and slipped her a paper ring for her wallet. The original grocery receipt one, now in a plastic sleeve with a sticky note that said, "When in doubt, donuts." At the door, she hugged Mara first, then me, and whispered, "Proof beats volume, Dad," which is not a goodbye. It's a spell. Mara and I watched her taillights draw a tidy line. We went inside and put her favorite mug on the highest shelf, not to hide it, so it would be there when the world needed to remember who she is. Noah's launch had already happened in the direction where the horizon learns to stretch. The kit got mailed instead of handed. He texted a photo of Wren holding the flashlight like it conferred rank. She thinks it's a microphone, he wrote. It is, I typed back. Tell it something true. 10 minutes later, a video pinged. Tiny voice, yellow boots, declarative nonsense to a lens. The creak inside my chest changed course again. We clapped in a kitchen 2 states away. We're getting good at distance that acts like a bridge. Sawyer moved across town into an apartment with a floor that begged for rugs and a window that overestimated its own insulation. He hung the rules on the fridge with the same dinosaur magnets that once held our marriage license. It feels like cheating, he said. It is, I replied. We cheat with experience now. Kai stayed the longest and left the loudest. Trade school, tools paid for one paycheck at a time, a lease with a clause so rude I laughed at it. He took the wrench index card and stuck it in the mirror frame like a threat. If I break it? Say so early, I finished. Then tell me how you plan to fix it. Then ask for help, he said. Then accept it, I said, and we shook on it like men who know how fences stand up to the weather. Not every launch was clean. We had backslides, do-overs, weeks when the creek ran backward. A job that deserved to be left lingered 3 months too long. A relationship tried to act like a home and turned out to be a hotel. A budget, insulted by reality, demanded we relearn what under $50 no narration means. We didn't panic. We refolded boats. We wrote new lines. We launched again. If you're looking for a family with straight arrows, keep scrolling. If you need proof that relaunches count, pull up a camp chair. On a night when the wind had opinions and the Fox nightlight refused to quit stuttering, I added to the fog spiral in the glove box because, yes, I recopy the good ones into the binder. I am that brand of ridiculous. Fog. Mercy. Number 1, 5-1, boat stuck under the twig, found its lane without a speech. Fog. Mercy. Number 152, help or witness, turned a fight into a plan. Fog. Mercy number 153, gas card used for a visit, not a getaway. Then I tuck the spiral beside the map that pretends it's a compass and the paper ring that pretends it's gold. Work called the next morning, like it does. Emails wanting things, projects that mistake urgency for importance, invitations to rooms with polished floors. I showed up, did my job, said no to the rooms that required a costume, said yes to the ones that kept groceries coming and my name intact. Rope, not air, air, not rope. Count together. The resume voice in my head cleared its throat and left. The porch won. Again. Weeks later, with the launches behind us and the house sounding like it remembered how to echo, we went back to the creek. We didn't bring scissors this time, we tore by hand. The first boat I made said nothing. I launched it blank, because sometimes the only honest thing you can do is let the water write it for you. It spun once, face downstream, and went. Say something funny, Mara asked, detonator in her voice. Okay, I said. We're the only people I know who save receipts for theology. She laughed, and we watched our paper declare itself to a river that refuses to keep records. Ordinary is my favorite miracle. Boats that don't sink while we're watching. Boats that sink and count anyway. A family that keeps showing up with paper and stubborn ink. A ridge that remembers our names and does not care about our titles. A God who, if he's as kind as I believe, smiles at two grown-ups launching obligations into a creek like they'll come back changed. Back home, I slid a new tab into the binder between VOWS and FENCES. I labeled it with a marker that bled in all the right places. Launches. If the kids ask what's in it, I'll tell them. Proof that paper can carry you just far enough. If you show up, if you count together, if you keep your boat small and your yes long, then I'll hand them the scissors and the Sharpie and let them write their own boat. And if they sink one, we'll laugh because sinking is not failure when the current's still in your favor and the porch light is on. We didn't start at 0 to count perfection. We started at 0 to count forward. Something, then more. That's the whole math. Chapter 27, 0 to something. Mesa Ridge, dusk. The ridge wore its evening like a well-used jacket. Wind shouldered past the pines with an old friend's entitlement, and the creek, the one we insist on calling a river, dragged light along its back as if it had someplace better to be. We parked at the turnout we always pretend is ours and laid out the same dented chairs that survive by refusing to notice their age. Mara handed me a thermos and touched my wrist, the quiet checkpoint that has kept me from delivering 1,000 unnecessary speeches. "Say something funny," she said. "Okay," I said. "The mountains send us invoices in the wind." She laughed, and my chest did that thing it does on this lip of the world. It built a porch. We sat, knees touching, boots planted, like two people who have learned the geometry of staying. Behind us, the essentials box weighted with its duct tape and Fox nightlight and photocopied fridge rules on a grocery receipt. No secrets. Say it plain. Be where you said you'd be. 2 drinks and a cap. Drive time prayers only. Fix what you break with help. Try again tomorrow. We are not subtle. We are practicing. Down the hill, Sawyer and Kai argued about whether a puddle counted as a creek. Faye, pretending not to be moved, braided a spare length of camp twine into a ring and slipped it onto her thumb. Noah took a photo of the sky, then didn't post it. Private beauty is a new muscle he's grown on purpose. Somewhere, 2 states east, a pair of yellow boots tromped through a backyard, and a little voice rehearsed the word "Papa," like a line that keeps getting better with use. That word rewired me, then taught me how to function with new wiring. It turned our kitchen into a chapel. It taught us to love 1,000 miles away without needing a receipt for every sacrifice. It made availability over ego a language, not a slogan. We built our long yes around that voice. We still do. I held the fog spiral on my knee, pencil tucked in the coil, and read back our latest proof like a man checking a line before the fire gets ideas. Fog. Mercy. Number 1, 5-1, boat stuck under twig, found its lane without a speech. Fog. Mercy number 152. Help or witness turned a fight into a plan. Fog. Mercy number 153. Gas card used for a visit, not a getaway. It's not poetry, it's oxygen. We came by it honestly, the mattress on a floor that wasn't ours, the payphone and the taillights, the parking lot papers, the courthouse Tuesday with a radiator doing its faithful dog impression, the officer's flashlight at my bad moment saying, "Don't screw this up," the manager's apology letter that taught me trust, verify, isn't cynicism, it's care. The layoff year that forced me to write the price tag next to every plan, the rooftop where the sky looked ironed and a woman whose voice I trust said, "We're never moving here." The wildfire line, the paper boats, the fence with Ray hammered into the end post like a benediction. None of it glamorous, all of it is true. The hawk stitched the air above us, busy at its job. Work is a rope, family is air. I've said it enough times that it knows its route now. There were years I let rope blister my hands. Weekly flights to polished rooms, titles that entered before my name, projects that mistook urgency for importance. They built resumes and eroded evenings. We learned to say no to rooftops and yes to ridges, to build our own work where it served our house instead of starving it. A scrappy recruiting shop that doubled as a belief factory, a home services stake that made clean vents feel like dignity, a robots break at 2 a.m. outfit that puts humans inside the future so it doesn't chew through neighborhoods. We did it without lantern parade funding. We did it with lunches, guardrails, and a calendar that finally learned our names. Rope when it kept the lights on. Air when rooms tried to charge us our marriage. That calculus kept us honest. On the way up the mountain, Mara had slid the paper trails binder into the map pocket because she knows how nights can swerve. Inside the paper ring from Tuesday, house rules on a receipt, count together scratched into our bands, the kids' letters, the hand-drawn ridge map that says, turn where the fence leans, a one-page budget that has saved at least 3 arguments, index cards that read, trust, verify, then write down how you did both, and work is a rope, family is air. Pick air. If legacy is just a drawer you leave easy to search, then ours is labeled. Paper doesn't applaud, it holds. When the power goes rude, the paper tells you where the candles are. When pride gets mouthy, those records remind you to cap it at 2. When a son calls from under a sink in a town that isn't yours, it hands you the right wrench and keeps your lecture in your throat. Remember when we didn't know anything? I asked. We still don't, Mara said. We just know how to try again tomorrow. Tomorrow's a tyrant and a mercy. She bumped my knee with hers the way she buys me another minute of good sense. We drank from the thermos like it was fancy and let the wind audit our day. I thought of the boy who sat in a Torino with a trunk full of stupid, the man on a shoulder breathing the alphabet like a test of citizenship, the father in a payphone's shadow inventing a way to keep breathing while taillights left, the husband in a kitchen offering a grocery receipt ring to a woman doing dishes like a hero, the boss counting deposits, slips on a milk crate and deciding to become boring on purpose, the grandfather who learned to clap across state lines. None of those people are different men. They are one man who keeps counting forward. 0 to something is not a jump, it's a habit. Down the road, a truck eased into the turnout, then thought better of it and kept going. We took the cue. I folded the spiral shut and stood. 1 lap, I said, before the light clock's out. We walked the rim and did our marriage like we always do. Logistics first, gas on the way down, eggs low, text Sawyer about the window draft, FaceTime tomorrow with boots and a puddle. Then the truth we save for air that doesn't repeat us. I'm scared of doing it wrong, I admitted, a sentence that never expires. Me too, she said. But we haven't drowned yet. On the last switchback, the wind grew loud enough to bully confession. I prayed my only prayer that wasn't trying to impress anyone. No thunder tonight, I said into the noise. Just the nudge to keep the caps on, the line set, the porch light on, the jokes bad, the rules simple, the love ordinary and long. The mountains did not applaud. They held. That's their job. That's enough. Back at the chairs, Faye had left a twine ring on my armrest and a note in her exacting print. Proof beats volume. Proud of you anyway. Noah had stacked pebbles into a tower that pretended to be permanent. Sawyer had drawn a map in dust and labeled the creek river in capital letters because naming power is still power. Kai had made a boat out of the paper sleeve from the thermos and launched it in a puddle that didn't ask for permission. The puddle declared itself a sea. The boat complied. We loaded the truck in the practiced silence of people who can find what they need in the dark. The Fox nightlight went in last, an unnecessary object we treat like a saint. As I shut the camper door, I caught my reflection in the small window. Older, steadier, less interested in applause, more interested in meeting morning on my feet. A man who keeps 2 fingers and a cap and a pencil near the places where he is most tempted to forget what he has already learned. A man still capable of dumb. A man getting quicker at apology. A man who has stopped trying to be impressive and started trying to be safe. On the way down, the fence with Ray at the end post flickered through the trees. I tapped the wheel twice, set him deep. We will. The bubble still split the line like judgment. The cedar sapling inside the fence tried to be taller. That's the whole game. Try to be taller without pretending you grew yourself. Accept water, hold fast, offer shade when you can. At home, the fridge was the same unglamorous altar it has always been. We taped a new index card next to the rules in my clumsy block print. 0 is honest. Something is earned. Count forward. Then we sat on the floor with our backs against the cabinet, two very small fingers and a cap on time, and let the ordinary finish its miracle. You know we're never moving here, right? Mara said deadpan, nodding at the cabinet like it was D.C. No, ma'am, I said. We're staying where the porch light knows our name. Good, she said. Say something funny. Okay, I said. We're the kind of people who save receipts for theology. She laughed. The building breathed. The city tried the door and found it steady. We weren't at zero. We were something. And if tomorrow took it, we knew how to count again. That's the secret no rooftop can sell you. Zero to something isn't a headline. It's a house that stands, a fence that holds, a bench with donut sugar on it, a cap that clicks on time, a daughter who braids twine into rings, a son who asks for torque specs instead of permission, a boy who declares a puddle a sea and is gloriously not wrong, a woman who keeps saying, breathe with me, and means it. It's a ridge that rents weekends and a God who accepts the rent in small, repeated mercies. We turned out the light and left the porch on, in case, for whoever needed to find us next, kids, grandkids, the dumb version of me that still occasionally wanders, a neighbor, a stranger, a fire line thanking us for making it easy to carry the water in the dark. We are here, not saved, steady, enough. Epilogue, paper, sky, porch. In the Paper Trails binder under a new tab labeled Launches, there's a photocopy of a receipt boat that says nothing, blank on purpose. The creek wrote that one for us. On the cabinet, next to 2 drinks and a cap, is a line that didn't exist when we started. If you're angry, do the dishes. If you're scared, say it. If you're lost, drive to the ridge. The glove box holds a pencil that will outlive us and a spiral that won't. That's fine. What matters is the habit, not the artifact. The bench by the gray water wobbles if you sit wrong. We sit right. The fence holds because a man taught me to prefer tools to speeches and groceries to advice. The porch light stays on more nights than not, defiant and kind. If you came here for parades, we wasted your time. If you came for a map that ordinary people can follow when the wind has opinions, take our paper. If you're starting at zero, we'll clap for you like you just chose the boring miracle. If you're already something, be small enough to stay safe and big enough to carry someone else's box to the truck. The last line belongs to the woman who steadied my ship and taught me how to steer without pretending the ocean owed me calm. Count together? She asks. Always, I answered. And we do. One breath, one bench, one ridge, one small mercy at a time, until the sky decides it's tomorrow and the porch remembers our names. About the author. Steve Urban didn't grow up with a silver spoon. He grew up with grit. Raised in Oklahoma by a hardworking single mom, Steve's early life was shaped by struggle, blue-collar values, and an unshakable belief that resilience beats pedigree. That same grit carried him through corporate boardrooms, trailer parks, near-empty bank accounts, and eventually reinvention. Today, Steve is the founder and CEO of WriterFlex, a recruiting and consulting firm built from scratch, no funding, no fluff, just hustle. He's also the host of the WriterFlex podcast, where he interviews leaders from all walks of life, and the author of 2 WriterFlex guidebooks on leadership, hiring, and interviewing. His latest venture, Robo-Reliance, is about solving the human problems behind robotic futures. Steve writes like he talks, straight up, no sugarcoating, all heart. With honesty, humor, and a fair amount of scar tissue, he pulls back the curtain on what it really means to rebuild your life and to do it with your kids watching. He's a man who's failed hard, loved deeply, and kept showing up anyway. He now splits his time between business ventures and mentoring job seekers. But the legacy he's proudest of, his kids, They know the truth. They've seen the scars, and they've always known where they came from because Steve never pretended to be perfect. He just refused to quit.